Afternoon session of the MAG meeting. Day 2 of our meetings, day 1 of the MAG meeting. As usual, we're being, in case you weren't here this morning, there is transcription. We are using the speaking queue, and you can find the link to the speaking queue on our front page underneath the tab. I think it's entitled Speaking Queue. And of course, the streaming is being sent to YouTube, so it's a webcast. Thank you. I'll take it over to Lynn, please.
Thank you, Chengetai. As we all come back for lunch, I think we're very happy to welcome the rain, and hopefully that takes it from 31, 32 degrees centigrade to 29, maybe. It's been obviously very hot here. One quick question. I think the people that are there in the speaking queue were left over from this morning, because I think that's the queue we walked through. So people should take their hands down unless they really want to hand up. And we had said we were going to come back and touch base quickly on the topping discussion, and then we will move into a review of the overall scheduling, so everybody has a kind of a common picture of that. And then we'll move into the main session planning, which is a substantive piece of today's discussion, but it was more to get the conversation started and sort of understand where we were. And then we will review other sessions, the Day Zero and Dynamic Coalitions, NRI, et cetera. And then again tomorrow it was to complete on the main sessions. Just to establish the overall schedule for the main sessions, the intent is that we walk out of the meeting tomorrow understanding what the main sessions are at the level of kind of a draft title and a paragraph describing them, with 2 co-facilitators assigned, so that we can go away and develop those fairly substantively in the next 2 to 3 weeks, substantively enough that we can put something in the program and that work can continue, albeit probably at a slower pace, over July and August. And I'm sure that's not an entirely comfortable schedule, but if we don't get a start now, there is no real opportunity to get a good start in July and August, and then of course we're coming back to September, and for all practical purposes, you know, the IGF is just too close at that point. So we need to make a really substantive start on those. We had all agreed that we would kind of move these main session discussions to this point in the process, because we wanted to see what had come through the workshop submissions, so that we understood the policy questions and then understood which sort of policy questions and workshops were actually going to make it up to the final program. Obviously there ought to be some kind of complementarity between the main sessions and the key thrusts of the program. So that's, as I said, that's the kind of largest piece of work remaining before us for the next day and a half. So with that, just before we broke for lunch, I think we had sort of said with the tailing discussion, there were some really good ideas that were suggested. Those are obviously all captured here in the transcript. We're going to set up an ad hoc working group that's going to look at the communications and the reporting, and I think that specifically will cover the tailing session as well. It may well cover the topping session, but we haven't had that discussion yet. And I sort of said that I think the what I'd heard, you know, over the various meetings was that there were sort of 2 possible approaches. One was, you know, a fairly straightforward introductory session to each one of the 3 major themes. Another one might be, and again we have 90 minutes for these, another one might be take a half hour and do that, and then take an hour and get some challenging speakers, some visionary speakers, somebody who was going to open the discussion up and potentially bring in you know, additional viewpoints. So I think that's sort of the question for the MAG. If there are other suggestions for how we might do the topping meetings as well, then please make those suggestions now. And if not, if you could please comment on the sort of 2 profiles I've outlined, which again is just what I've actually heard from the group over the last few months. So So we'll take your comments now. Any strong view to whether or not you think it would be most helpful to have, again, a rather sort of straightforward introductory session? You know, this is digital inclusion. Our track and sessions here today cover X. If there are intersessional work that is appropriate, we could of course cover that as well, but kind of an introduction to the IGF ecosystem as it relates to each one of those thematic tracks, and maybe some, I don't know if it's really definitional work, but something that orients them to the program over the days. We could do that. I don't know if we need 90 minutes to do that, but that's fine. If we think we can do that, and we can do that in less, we can return time, as they say. Or we could do that in a half hour and try and pull, again, you know, a keynote speaker or a small panel or, you know, philosopher, social scientist. And if there's no strong opinion on that at this point in time, I'll come to Paul in a moment. It's something that the thematic working groups could maybe go away and think through overnight. We can revisit tomorrow. So if it just needs more time to percolate, then we can do that as well. But in the meantime, I'll thank Paul for jumping in again to the breach here. Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn. Poor Rani. I actually like what you just said, so I just want to support that, of having the topping session, doing the introductions and everything else, but having some speaker of sorts that is quite prominent, because I think that would attract people to that session and probably make it more relevant for people to put it in their calendars. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. You should put it in the chat room. I mean, we really try to reserve this portion of the meeting for MAG members. Antoine, if you put it in the chat room, and I think it's relevant enough, we can maybe read it out or something, but. Ben? No. Sorry? No, so let me just, so today is a MAG meeting, and we tend to just hear from the MAG members, but if you're in the WebEx, the chat room, put your comment in there, and what we've done in some instances is read them out of the room or invite somebody to speak, and I personally don't like to be too rigid with that, but if I'm too flexible, I get calls. Ben, you have the floor.
Thank you. So this is a short comment about how we should approach the topping sessions. And while I agree that it might be something that eventually the thematic working groups go away and organize, I think it would be best to start from a point where the MAG as a whole agrees on a template. Because, I mean, with the evaluation process, we kind of grew organically, and because we had a short amount of time, and so the working groups took slightly different approaches. Another starting point could be the narrative descriptions that we drew together back in March, April, which kind of give an introduction to the issue themselves. But I'm not sure yet how to turn that into an interesting and useful 1 hour session. So clearly we still need to do some thinking about that. Thanks.
No, thank you. And just to reiterate, yes, I wasn't suggesting that we have different approaches but since we've had the thematic working group, if people are more comfortable kind of kicking around what would be most useful in terms of advancing the things they thought were important in those tracks, just to allow kind of almost like breakout time in the background. Is there anybody else who has a view? Otherwise, I guess my reading would be that maybe the MAG needs more time to think about kind of which model is preferred, or whether or not there's a third model. Well, why don't we just try and come back to that tomorrow? I mean, again, I think the question right now is pretty kind of either it's a more traditional introductory session, or it's a combination of an introductory session and a visionary speaker, or a small panel, or somebody who is kind of challenging, or, you know, a small panel of youth to talk about what some of this means to them and what their values and principles are. I mean, there's a number of different threads we could potentially pick up if you wanted to pick up on any particular part of your thematic track that you thought could either bring in new people, open up the conversation, or advance the discussion. So we'll, okay, Yuta, you have the floor.
Sorry, the speaking queue didn't work promptly, so that's why I raised my hand. I do think that the concept that we now have the three main themes is quite new to the community. We have not had that before, and I don't know whether people who have submitted proposals, they might be aware of that structure now, but most people that are participants don't have submitted a proposal, would not be aware of that. So I would follow what Ben suggested. The narratives could be a good starting point to make people familiar what we have changed from previous years to this year, to have a more structured program, and that it's following these three tracks. So that might be a starting point.
We also haven't yet touched upon the newcomer session, so doing something with the newcomer session might be a way to talk about the process this year and how to implement and look forward to next year as well, as another opportunity to do some of the things you've said, Yuta. Sylvia, you have the floor.
Sorry, Miguel.
No worries.
Make you move. Musical chairs, sorry. Silvia Cadena, Technical Community. Just wanted to ask, it has been a little bit, there's so many ideas floating in how to do the topping and tailing sessions and how they actually might make sense. Would it be possible for the people that has made those proposals to send just a short paragraph to the mailing list, to the MARC mailing list, so that we can kind of see them all together, and when we deliberate tomorrow about where to go, it's not about how I understood the proposal, but how the person that was proposing it did it. Because I think there are quite several implications on all of the proposals in terms of the logistics. For example, if it is working groups, then if that meeting room can be reset to actually have roundtables and stuff. So there are quite a few considerations, and although I jump into all the excitement of all the ideas proposed, I think it would be really good if we can understand, you know, very briefly what it is that each one of the proposals is addressing. In that, if that's possible, then maybe we can make a little bit of better comments, I guess, to decide how to structure those sessions. Because there were two complementary proposals from Timea, Maria Paz, Ben also added some. So how to put them all together, and there are others that I lost count. So if that would be possible, or a Google document maybe, where we can start dumping some ideas.
Well, I mean, if Timea and Maria are willing to do that, then I would say it's possible. I actually think that we do need to do that at some point. I think that was work that we agreed would move to the ad hoc working group, and we can actually give it adequate time. If there was time to kind of document just what both were suggesting, so we have it in mind today, that's fine. I just don't know if for the tailing one in particular, we need to define today, because I think that's more about process and rapporteurs and consultants if we're going to do the reporting, and I think that's kind of a little bit of internal work that we have to do ourselves. So, and I don't know that impacts the workshop organization. It maybe impacts some of the rapporteur responsibilities within the workshop, but the topping one is maybe different.
As Yuta just mentioned, because this is a new thing, right? And using the narratives might actually help to structure how those spaces are built. Then to actually know how much of our time different members of the MARC can contribute to each one of the working groups is also, you need a little bit of information to, I need a little bit of information to decide where I can put the limited time that I have to be able to contribute to the process. So it's just a matter of a couple of paragraphs to understand where you guys are going and see if that is something that we can contribute, and then let the working group do the work, or if it is something where I would like to be in the working group. But I just don't think that I have enough to actually make that decision, and just, yeah, a point of procedure, I guess. But anyway, it's okay. Thank you.
So I think Yuda's comment was more to the topping, although one could see how that might roll through to the tailing sessions as well. And then I think the question really is, are Timea and Maria in particular able to write up, you know, a couple paragraphs or half a page on what your thoughts were? I guess that would be this afternoon overnight to bring it back in tomorrow. And then I think the topping session, I don't know that there are any concrete proposals other than something which looked like a more traditional introductory and the other one. Let me go to Susan in the queue, and then see where we are here in terms of what would be helpful to the group. Susan?
Thank you, Chair. And I'll keep my comments brief. But from what I've heard, just at least on the topping session, a few different ideas, but the idea of having a speaker, kind of a high-profile speaker, starting the session out, also starting the week out with the topping session with a narrative. I think that makes a lot of sense. And then it might be useful to, since the session is 80 minutes, I think kind of having the narrative, a speaker, but even the opportunity for workshop participants or the panelists or the organizers to give a little preview of their session. That way, the respective workshops could they could maybe even get to know each other, have a feel for which sub-themes that they might want to look out for, and it could foster a little bit more discussion within the workshop organizers in that track. But I agree with Sylvia that, yeah, we will have to turn to the mailing list to suss all of this out and to organize it, but for those 80 minutes in that topping session, that might be something that we'd like to consider as a format. Thank you.
So I think there was a question on the table as to whether or not we could get Timea and Maria to kind of write up the points. You have the transcript to start with, if you can cut and paste from the transcript. And, so maybe we do that for the tailing document.
Yeah, I can do it. Whatever, do you want the two proposals, or do you want the merge of the two? We can work together for merging. Yeah.
I guess, you know, it's up to you guys, but I guess we all will contribute to that, because it will be kind of like a responsibility of the MARC to do, and there are a lot of sessions that are new. So just having a little bit of guidance on how you tackle those will probably be useful. And just to start the thread on the mailing list and figure out how it goes from there, working groups or whatever will happen after. But just not to leave so many things hanging after the meeting, if that's possible.
Yep. I think we've said we can leave it to Timea and Maria to see if, you know, and whether it's a merge or whether both ideas are briefly explained and you believe there's a nice, you know, happy combination. Leave it to that, but get that discussion kicked off on the mailing list. And that brings us back to the topping session, which I think Susan just outlined kind of nicely, pulling the various pieces together. That maybe it's a combination of a revisit of the narrative and the purpose of the track. Maybe a high-level speaker to get some interest in or expand some view, and something that actually does do an introduction to the individual workshop sessions, whether that's you know, a kind of consolidated view, or whether or not it's workshop organizers, I think is something we could leave to later, but it would be those kind of three components. Susan, do you want to write that up in a couple of paragraphs and get that thread kicked off on the mailing list? She just said yes, so that's good. Yuta, are you in the queue? Ben, you're in the queue?
Oh, yes, I am. And for a minute I'd forgotten what I was going to say. Now I've remembered. I'm in two minds about an idea around the topping session. The themes were chosen by the MAG. The narrative frameworks were drafted by the MAG. And I wonder whether the MAG members themselves would possibly take a leading role in presenting in this session about what we envisaged to be discussed under this theme, and that the MAG take responsibility for introducing the theme, given that we chose it, we described it, we framed it. And I'm in two minds because I'm aware sometimes there's a feeling that, you know, the MAG's there to organize it, but give enough time as possible for the community as a whole. MAG members shouldn't take up time in the schedule, that kind of thing. But on the other hand, you know, the MAG came up with these themes and described them and framed them, so maybe we've got a responsibility to kick things off and explain what we had in mind. So that was a thought. That is not a single, you know, that's an observation and maybe a contribution to Susan's efforts later. Thanks.
Thank you, Ben. I actually think that's fairly similar to what Yuta was describing as well, when she talked about a little bit about kind of the process that we got here and working through the narrative. So I think the two of you were a sort of very similar idea for at least that section of what might happen at the session. So I'm sure Susan will take those comments in when she just tries to. Again, this is about kind of capturing the current state of the discussion and enough substance that we can get a discussion going on the mailing list. Are there any, Jennifer, you have the floor.
Thanks, Lynn. Jennifer Chung, private sector. Just a procedural question here. I know perhaps before lunch you called for an ad hoc working group to deal with the topping and tailing sessions. We're still doing that, is that correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. We did call for an ad hoc working group. Yes, and the ad hoc working group is the one that's going to look at the reporting process that's in place, and I think the secretary was going to send the document from last year's process around. Take that into account. There have been various ideas too about how we can improve that. But I also think that what comes out of that ought to be something that feeds the tailing session and ultimately feeds the closing session on the Friday. So the notion was that this ad hoc working group, and we'll write this up as well in an email and get a formal, was the ad hoc working group would look through those kind of reporting requirements and also take into account the fact that we have these tailing sessions which have a kind of reporting component of them, and the that 1 hour slot in the closing session as well. So it was to do those sort of three activities. But as I said, we'll write that up and get that out and get a formal call out to the MAG for participants. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Lynn, for that clarification. I guess we also would want to wait for the documents to be sent to the list from Tamia, Maria, and also Susan, so we'll be able to, you know, fully embrace all the good ideas that we had earlier as well. One more point I wanted to, I guess, remind everyone, as we already know, or the lightning wants to speak first. So we of course this year, you know, thanks to the German hosts, they're doing, you know, their best to bring in a lot of high-level people from different stakeholders. Perhaps something we can also consider for the topping and tailing would be, you know, people were saying bring in some high profile people, bring in some people who can moderate. However the sessions will turn out structurally, it would also be a very good thing for us to consider this part as well, because it would make the program more attractive to people if we're intending to have it to be a very cohesive agenda. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree. It would be a reasonable place to look for support, and hopefully something else you can offer to them as well in terms of some substantive role or substantive visibility in the program.
Yeah, maybe I just thought about stepping in there, because I think for the topping session, maybe that should be a combination of a brief introduction by a sort of a moderator, which could be a MAG member, of course, and then a high-ranking speaker. And of course, if you can help there, because we hope that we have a lot of high-ranking speakers coming for the day 0 and the first day, and then they should, of course, stay over the following days, and that could give them a role. And indeed, maybe that could be a combination. Thanks.
No, I think those are really good suggestions as well. Danko, you were in the queue. No? Jutta?
I think I can take my hand down now, because that was exactly what I wanted to address, what Jennifer said, and also Daniela. Thanks.
Okay, so I think what we have is a call will go out with a brief description for the ad hoc working group for the reporting process, and that will also incorporate the kind of some of the tailing requirements and the closing session requirements as well. And then separately we'll have another thread which will look at the topping session, which Susan is going to drive, and could maybe incorporate some of this last round of discussions as well. And we'll get those out and get them started soon. Anything more on the topping and tailing? Again, that was a kind of new approach in line with the more cohesive, more focused approach to the program overall. Any final thoughts or observations or questions? Susan?
It just, I can't recall, but I was wondering if I think it was either Paul or Ben. I'm wondering who we have to thank for the topping and tailing term of art.
We can get rid of it.
That's, it wasn't really a serious question, but.
I know. I actually thought it might have been me, and I've tried to move away from it several times, but without success. We can absolutely find better ways, but at least it didn't imply that it was an introductory session and not anything more. Okay, so the next item is to move to the main session planning. And we're first going to hear from the Secretariat again, so we all understand kind of the overall outline of the schedule. And then we wanted just an introductory discussion so we could hear what sort of ideas people have, suggestions for how to approach them. And we actually have quite a good amount of time for that discussion, because I think we're probably we'll go through the day 0, the open forums, dynamic coalitions, et cetera, but I don't know that today we actually need any additional follow-up. So I think we can probably get a little bit of time back from agenda item 6 there. So let me go to the Secretariat for the introduction, and then we'll come back.
Okay, just waiting for the scheduling template to be displayed. Okay, if we can go to day 1. Yes, that's day 1. For day 0 it's not displayed, but you already know the outline for day 0. In the morning there's going to be the session for the high-level leaders meeting, that's what I call it. And that's going to take up 4 rooms, and we have populated the rest of the sessions with the day 0 requests, and I think we managed to fit in everybody there if we give those people who applied just one session. There's some organizations that applied for 2 sessions or 3 sessions, but we will ask them to choose one, and then I think that's fair, and we can have a good distribution there. Of course, there's going to be...
2 hours for introductory session.
Oh, where? Yes, okay.
More options.
Yeah, no. So that's for the day 0. For day 1, I think we've already explained and gone through for the workshop sessions, so we don't have to go through those again. And then we have 1 room for the open forums, and then a room for the dynamic coalitions and best practice forums. And I think the rest is for the NRI sessions, which we're going to have 6 of them for the NRIs. And that's basically going to run through the whole program, except for day 4, the final day, where, can we just display day 4 quickly? Yes, so we have the tailing sessions there, and there'll be no parallel sessions in the afternoon as well. And at the beginning of the afternoon, we have the, I don't know what exactly to call it, but the summary session where we read out, or concluding session where it's just a broad overview of what has happened in all the sessions. So that's the thematic sessions, plus also for the other sessions, the open forums and the national and regional initiative. So those people who have missed the other sessions because they were either following a thematic stream, or for the open forums, etc., can have an overview of what has happened, and also hear the key messages that have been derived from those sessions. And then we have the open mic session, that's the traditional session and taking stock session, and then the closing ceremony, which is the traditional closing ceremony. If we go back to day 1 again, sorry. Yeah. For the main sessions, for the first day, we've just penciled in. Don't regard that time so far. We have a session for newcomers. This is also up to discussion. Do we need an hour and a half for newcomers? If that session is there, the newcomers will also miss the topping sessions, etc. So do we want to shorten it so that it's only come in the morning, so between 8 and 9, or we have 8 to 9 a quick session and then a longer session for those people who want to stay behind and learn more about the IGF? That's something that we have to discuss, but I can leave it to the newcomer session group to discuss about that. The second session on day 1 is what we just termed the frontier issues session. So that's just been earmarked to talk about something that, in line with the Secretary General's speech and his wishes, a frontier issues driven session, and that could also be something to do with the HLBDC outcomes or anything else. And it really depends, because we don't know what the report is going to say on Monday. We might have something to react to it. We might have a consultative process and they can accumulate in that session, or we can have a philosophers and ethnographers meeting or whatever. So we're just putting that there until we have better definition of what's coming out of the Secretary General's office. As has already been explained this morning, the opening ceremony will begin at 2 o'clock, and then we have the high-level session, which is organized by the host country in cooperation with DESA. For the next day, just go to day 2. Then just as placeholders, we've divided the main sessions into an hour-and-a-half sessions. So we don't have to keep those hour-and-a-half sessions, but that leaves 8 sessions there. So if we give the national and regional initiatives 1 session, and if we give the dynamic coalitions 1 session, then that would give us 6 sessions that we have to fill in if we keep with the same timing. There's already been, what I've seen, there's already been 1 solid proposal going around the Christchurch proposal, and then we have to see what other proposals that can come up. And those are there like that, but we can have a 2-hour session and then a 1-hour session. It really depends on what the MAG feels and how we should organize it. I will just turn over and see if I've left anything out. No. Okay.
Giacomo, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yes, was simply for the point before, but you give me the floor now. But I think that is a proposal that can work for many points of the discussion we have now. If we are thinking eventually to ask for some professional moderators, journalists, in Berlin we have plenty of them, of very high quality from our members, ARD, ZDF or Deutsche Welle. So if we know in advance, if you think that would be appropriate at a certain point, just let us know and we will discuss with them as soon as possible.
And also, as Lynn mentioned earlier on, I mean, this year we've got a little bit of freedom because the thematic, what used to be the thematic main sessions can be taken up with the topping sessions as well. So that's something to think about. We can have more freedom to see what we're going to do with these sessions.
Thank you, Chengetai. And I think what's giving us the added flexibility this year is the fact that we're not using UN interpreters, we're using interpreters that the German government is bringing in, so we have more ability to schedule their hours across a longer period, and it's making a tremendous difference in terms of, I think, the populating the program and doing it kind of comfortably. And again, some additional flexibility. Sylvia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn. Well, I'm going to jump into the proposal for the main session about the Christchurch call, which some of you have already heard about and Lynn mentioned, and Jeremy Malcolm also sent them an email from a separate thread, so I guess there are some interest from other communities as well. The background of the proposal that I'm just going to share with you is that when the Christchurch attacks to the mosques happened, the deadline for the workshop proposal was kind of looming. And in the midst of all the challenges that the technical community and the social media platforms and the media was dealing in managing that crisis and reacting to that crisis, they managed to submit a workshop proposal to on the safety and security theme that was really like wiping something really quickly, because of course they were dealing with the actual crisis at the moment, but just trying to capture what the possible lessons were going to be about what they were experiencing in Christchurch. The Christchurch call came actually after the deadline for the workshops. So if you look at the proposal 144, where Internet New Zealand and other organizers presented a proposal about what was happening in their case, in their situation, it's just a very brief proposal that, as you know, in the last 8 weeks have evolved into a full-blown text that was signed by several countries and many companies, and without that much of a consultation process, a very limited influence from the civil society in that space, and that as a result, has had a little bit of a criticism about how the Christchurch call came to be. So the idea of this main session, the topic or the title, the draft title that we've been working on is Internet Platforms and the Challenges of Online Content Moderation, from the Christchurch call to the future of multi-stakeholder participation in a world demanding quick action. So I guess the challenge or the idea of that we're trying to encapsulate in that title is to, instead of criticizing, sitting at the side, at the borders of the call, the Christchurch call, the text and the process and everything else, and criticize that it didn't have enough consultation, that it didn't have civil society participation, which we know, and they agreed, and they are doing some processes on the side to kind of redress that. It's more about, okay, how can, as a community, see that there are some policy actions that are required during a crisis, and in what context and how quick the multi-stakeholder process can adapt to help during a crisis. And some responses during crisis are chaotic, others are not well thought, and others are coming from good intentions and the heart, like the one that Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister from New Zealand, managed in all the way how she managed the crisis. So the idea is that the proposal will try to look, by the time we are in Berlin, back in Berlin, the Christchurch call will have been started with the implementation process. They are running at the moment an open consultation, not to the text that was already signed by companies and governments, but a process about how civil society and other stakeholders can participate in the implementation of the call. So the idea of this main session will be to try to figure out what happened in all of those 6 months, what mechanisms were part of this, and during the process of preparing the session, how can we contribute to the process, which is a real concrete outcome of how all of these issues around security and safety in cyberspace actually touch lives and affect lives of people in the real world every day. So what I've been doing with Jordan Carter, Ellen Strickland, David Reed from the New Zealand government, and some other folks that are participating in the proposal, what we're participating in, or are participating in the Christchurch call, sorry, is to take text that on the original workshop proposal that they submitted and rearrange it into the template that we have for main sessions for last year, and see how it addresses policy questions, how it touches on the relevant issues about what happened after the call for proposals closed down, and how can we use those 90 minutes to come a productive conversation around what happened, and how can we support to improve the process, not necessarily viewed it with a stick and an academic eye, right? The good news is that there is actually a very strong possibility to have Jacinda Ardern to join the IGF to come and explain the Christchurch call and how the call came to be and how the call is implemented. Of course, no one wants to raise expectations to have the coolest Prime Minister in the planet coming, but maybe. So of course, I will share the draft that we are working on, and I really welcome your comments and your input about how can we organize this. There have been several mentions of the Christchurch call, for example, in the Internet and Jurisdiction Conference. One of the high-ranking officials from the Canadian government, Mr. McGovern, that was in the opening plenary, presented how Canada sees the implementation process and the text also. And in several of the workshops, especially the workshop on the track around content, there were several of those conversations happening. So we've been investigating academics that might be able to contribute to the process, technical community members, civil society members that are actually part of that review and implementation process, to see how that takes shape into a session. If you look at the link for what the Christchurch call actually is, it's a very stern text that the many social media companies agreed to sign, when several governments are signatories, and that list is kind of growing. So it is it's not bilateral, but it's not multi-stakeholder either, I guess. So it's something in between. So if we could take a look at that and see, it is a very concrete policy action on a very strong issue affecting society, and I hope to have the MAC consideration to see how to incorporate it into the program. And I am merely facilitating and putting people together, so I am all hands on deck if this goes ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. We'll keep going through the queue, let people think through that a little bit. I will note that at one point, the transcriber said saying the name, where you had actually said that it was the Prime Minister of New Zealand who could potentially come, just to make sure that that was noted properly. Next in the queue, we have Chennai. Chennai, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I think I just wanted a little bit more clarity on the frontier sessions. So I've gone through the transcription and I've seen that it's been reserved for when the HLPTC report comes out on Monday, and it could be a space to also discuss that, and correct me if I'm wrong. So I think the last time frontier sessions were mentioned in the last meeting, they were spoken about as in when topics that might come up that might be, that we might have missed during the selection, and then something interesting comes up a month prior to the meeting, and I thought they would be given maybe an opportunity for either we would have seen them from the current sessions that have come in that might be interesting topics but don't have room yet, or if something fantastic happens where, I don't know, maybe Facebook or Google is broken up, and then it might be an opportunity for that to be a hot topic that's discussed at that meeting. So I would have assumed, because I can see from the program that we haven't created space for flash discussions, for example, if someone wants to say something in 5 minutes, or for people who might already be there and they've got a new topic. So I was just thinking that it's fantastic to have this frontier session, that we will discuss this high-level report as it comes out and has been given the rightful importance within the Internet Governance Forum meeting, but thinking about participants who will actually be there and have a topic that, 3 months later we weren't able to submit it for the proposal, but you're actually in the space and you would actually have to have an opportunity to engage on this topic. So I don't know if we could think about opening up that frontier session a little bit more to maybe have thinking off the top of my head, maybe like a town hall format where you reserve perhaps the last 30 minutes and people can sign up for slots in advance to actually say, I want to come and talk about this particular topic, if you're already coming, not to necessarily say that we extend an invite or someone has to apply again to actually then get an invitation later to say, come and talk about this topic. So maybe thinking about the frontier sessions to be more about what's new, what has happened in the last couple of months that we hadn't thought about post-workshop selection as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Chennai. There was actually quite a lot in what you said, and I think we could come back to the frontier session in a moment. To take the last point, we do actually have an item on lightning sessions, and is that what you would mean when you say flash sessions as well?
Yes.
And then, and then I don't know if there's an opportunity to do something. One of the last things you talked about was almost more what in some other communities I'll call a birds of a feather session, which is, there seems to be a burgeoning topic and there's some interest in it, but it's not really well formed, and people say, if anybody wants to get together to discuss this to see if it's a real issue or of interest, or I'll meet you here for an hour on, and sometimes tremendous pieces of work have come out of that. Sometimes it's, it's really not. I don't know if that's sort of what you were talking about when you talked about those 30-minute sign-up sessions, or if that was kind of the flash lightning sessions.
So I think those birds of the feather, I've seen that they organically happen, that they usually organically happen at the IGF, so I wasn't thinking about those ones, because I think people often self-organize, but I was thinking more in terms of, okay, fine, I've now seen that there's a lightning sessions, but those for if people want to sign up and speak on the public forum, not just like in a, like having it in like a lunchtime space or something like that, but to actually be given importance for then people to sign up and actually say, I've got this whole captured audience, and then this is what I want to say about this topic.
Do you have
I'm sorry, I'm still, I couldn't hear you properly, so I'm still reading, because, I mean, you do understand there is a space for the flash sessions, correct? And you were saying that you wanted another space where people can sign in, but there is going to be a space for the lightning sessions. And also to answer your question on the frontier issues, it's not necessarily for the HLBDC report, because the report might come out on Monday and it's got nothing to do with there's nothing there for the IGF to do. So, but there are a lot of things that the UN and the Secretary General is interested, because when he came last year, he did mention quite a number of issues that we can fill in that spot later on. We do have 6 sessions. We filled 1 so far. Probably we filled in 1. So there's 5 more to fill in. If we fill in those and then we're lacking space, then we can, I think then we can come back and revisit that other space. But yes, I also do think it is a good idea. Maybe we can reserve one of those 5 spaces for something that's going to come up. And then we'll have 4 spaces to fill, and then we can work it that way, and then we can come back and do a run over again. Would that be okay?
So let me just clarify the process we're working towards. But I think right now we're in the process of identifying possible topics for main sessions. What we have is a slot for the DCs, a slot for the NRIs, 6 sessions, and 1 that was kind of place carded as frontier issues for the UN. So, the things that I've got so far was, there was a proposal for Christchurch. I don't think any of these are a given, by the way. The MAG hasn't had the discussion yet. There's a proposal for Christchurch. It feels like there's a proposal somewhere in the winds for a frontier or an HLPDC. Earlier this morning, we heard some possible cross-cutting topics. Internet of Things, jurisdiction, and AI were the 3 that I took down. I think what we wanted to do in this session was just kind of pull the ideas out from the room to see what we had for suggested topics, and then we will continue to let them percolate overnight and come back tomorrow and advance them. So I just want to make sure that we're all kind of clear on the process. And it might be a good idea to leave some space open for late-minute topics. I don't know if I would leave a 90-minute main session with interpretation open for a late topic, because I'm not sure you really get the right organization and the right level of speakers there. But I think we can absolutely, and particularly with the flexibility and the venue here and the flexibility with interpreters, I think if there was a really important late-breaking topic, I'm fairly confident we could find room for it. But let me see if Danielle and Rudolph have any other comments or anything you'd like to.
Yes. Thank you, Lynn. In fact, I just wanted to say that I think it's very wise to leave 1 session for discussion on the high-level panel or whatever that might be then in the end. I also noted some cross-cutting issues this morning, thinking that that could be wise to take them up in the main sessions. You mentioned already IoT, jurisdiction, AI. I had also human rights. Maybe there is also an interlinkage with the Christchurch call, so could be a way to take that issue up, maybe. And I have another one. I think there's another issue that is discussed very much right now on the international level, not least this weekend among the G20 ministers, because there is a meeting of digital and trade ministers in Japan. And so I would suggest 1 main session on digital governance and digital trade. Thanks.
Thank you. I noted those on the list. We can get this list out to the MAG members later today as well, so we've actually got it in our mailbox to think through overnight. So going through the list here, Kenta, you have the floor. You speak very quickly, so if you could speak a little more slowly, we'll make sure the transcribers.
Okay, sorry. Thank you so much, Chair. I'm Kenta Mochizuki, Japanese MAG member from business sector community. Actually, I might illustrate the point, but regarding the schedule on day one, with regard to the main session, especially the IGF for beginners main session, I think participants in the IGF for beginners main session should also be able to participate in topping sessions. So would it be possible for us to move the topping sessions just after the IGF for beginners main session, and instead of that to hold the other sessions like open forum or DC BPF or NRIs in slots from 9:30 to 11:20. So I would appreciate if you could think about that. Thank you.
Moving the other sessions would be a bit difficult because then it squeezes the sessions, and we may have to lose a workshop or two. But I think it might be a good idea to make the first session, the newcomer session, a little bit earlier if we can. Yes, so that people who are newcomers can come in early and get the benefit of that session.
No, I think that
sorry, Kennedy, guys. Thank you very much. Yeah, I fully agree with you. And also, I forgot to say one thing. I fully support, what Daniela said, because, Japan is the chair of the G20 now. So thank you.
Thank you, Kenta. So I think it is a good solution if we do move the newcomers up and make sure that it's not competing against any of the other really important and kind of introductory sessions. And also Kenta's support for the digital governance, digital trade was noted. Jennifer, you have the floor.
Thanks, Lynn. I originally had 3 points, but Kenta made one of them, so I would just like to also support moving the beginner session or introductory session up, so they'll be able to come to the thematic introductory sessions, because I think that's pretty much why we wanted to have that in the first place, so support for that. The second point I wanted to bring up is a little, I guess it's to do with the scheduling. Looking at the day 2, day 3 schedules, it looks like the main sessions right now are being allotted 90 minutes. I think that's a little short. I don't know if I recall correctly that MAG members previously in our calls and also the April meeting, we did mention that we thought that 120 minutes would be more fitting for a main session if we're giving, this particular topic, the importance, the transcribing, the translations as well. So looking at day 2 and day 3, I see there's a half an hour break in between the morning 2 main sessions. If we could shorten that, it would make sense. I don't know how much time we would need to move in between rooms, but 30 minutes seems very generous. I don't know how slow of walkers we might be. And then for the afternoon, I do note that we're starting again at 3 p.m. and it ends around 6. So I don't know if that would mean we would lose the main session or if we would be able to push it up or push it down. One idea I had as I was listening to Chennai is if we do extend the main session, supposedly we do extend it to 120 minutes, the afternoon session will become one main session, and then we would still have an hour perhaps on day 2 and day 3 with a main room, with transcription, with translation, that could be reserved for emerging topics, not particularly in an ad hoc format like the lightning sessions, but something less concrete than the Christchurch call, for example. That came up after everything was closed, but from now until November, there could be issues, topics, events that really affect the internet governance space that we are in. It's possible that we reserve that hour at the end of day 2, for example, for something like that. It's just a suggestion. mainly because I think the 90 minutes for a main session is quite short, because we're allotting 90 minutes for the workshops as well. And my third point I'll reserve for when we talk about lightning sessions. So thanks.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think it's entirely possible to have the main sessions of 4 for 2 hours each, in fact, because I understand we have the interpreters for 8 hours over the course of the day. We can get confirmation of that from...
It's been confirmed that we can have the interpreters for as long as is reasonable, yeah, so whatever.
And I don't know, we can look at, you know, the schedule overall. I'm not sure I'd shorten the 30 minutes between the sessions. I would probably take it away from the lunch break or something, just in terms of they never end on time, people never get off the stage on time, and everybody needs to come in and need to clean up and reset, and it's always just a little bit tense between those that are being rushed off and those that are rushing on. But that's a detail that I know the Secretariat can walk us through. But I think that the takeaway from there is that 2-hour sessions for main sessions is possible without reducing the number of main sessions. So if anybody was in the queue to support that or comment on that, we can save ourselves some time and take it as a given that we will move up to 2-hour main sessions, you know, where requested, and we are not shortening them. Before I go to the next person in the queue, I just want to see if there's anything else. Danielle, I think you need to leave soon. If there's...
I just would apologize because, in fact, I have to leave. You know, Stefan Schnorr is in Japan right now due to the G20 meeting, and I have to take over some of his tasks also, so I apologize for that, but I'll be back tomorrow morning. Have a nice evening, even though the weather is much less good than yesterday.
Can I just say, on behalf of the canal, he just got his bag from he lost his bag yesterday in the public transportation here in Berlin, and it was returned to him today. So thank you guys for doing a great job in Berlin.
You know, I'd like to thank...
With a computer and a passport inside.
The only other place that might happen was in Switzerland, and I did that on a train once. I do want to just thank Daniela. I know she was a little concerned about leaving, and I said she's already given so much and so much time here in terms of participation that, you know, we're very, very pleased to have her here, and obviously Rudolph is here in good stead as well. So we'll make sure and take your comments earlier into account when we put out the draft. Thanks very much. You're welcome. Thank you. So Giacomo, you have the floor. Nope, Giacomo doesn't have the floor. So we'll get your hand taken down. Halani's participating online.
Thank you, Chair. My point has been just raised by another MAG member, so I actually put my hand down, but your system is a bit delayed. Thank you.
Thank you, Halani, and thank you for your continued attention. It's not always easy to participate remotely, so appreciate your efforts. Susan Chalmers. Susan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. And just, I briefly wanted to support Jen's comments regarding longer main sessions, and supporting the general notion that we reserve some space for a late breaking issue. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think both those things are a given. You know, we said we have some good flexibility in the overall program and the flexibility, and again, we can proceed on the assumption that we have 2 hours for the same number of main sessions. Jorge, you have the floor.
Thank you so much. Jorge Cancio, Switzerland, former host country, for the record. Just wanted to support the idea put forward by the present host country co-chair that we reserve some space to the high-level panel, and apart from supporting that, to put some, let's say, history to this. In 2017, the IGF, we co-organized, we hosted in Geneva. We had a high-level session on the future of our common digital governance. 7 months later, partly as a reaction to the broad feeling that we sensed in Geneva, and which also was reflected in the Geneva messages, the UN Secretary General established a high-level panel. When he came for the first time in person to an IGF in Paris, he really gave us a lot of ideas, a lot of requests to think about, and I think he also involved a lot into the discussion what the high-level panel at that moment was beginning to discuss internally. In a couple of days we will have the report. We will have a lot of processes going on in NRIs on this. So I think that especially if the UN Secretary General comes again to Berlin, hopefully, it would be very fitting that we continue that conversation. So I'll leave it by that. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you, Jorge. Ben Wallace, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn. So I understand this is a moment for canvassing ideas, and many thanks to whoever is logging all of these in one place for us to be able to refer back to. I thank you, Lynn, for confirming that the main sessions will actually be 2 hours long. If it feels like we need 2 hours for a main session, that was going to be one of my concerns. On the Christchurch call, I think that's a very interesting and very relevant topic, and it brings in various stakeholder groups, the responsibilities of social media companies like Microsoft, the role of governments, the views of civil society. And in some ways it might be seen as cross-cutting, broader issues around online safety and digital civility, striking the balance between freedom of expression and protecting against hate speech and the spread of terror. And the Christchurch call is a very timely focal point for such a discussion. We haven't got as far as discussing whether some of the main sessions should be set aside specifically for each of the 3 themes. There might have been an assumption that that was the case. So we might need to reflect whether the proposals coming forward now in this canvassing of ideas should be seen as a main session related to one particular theme. So maybe Christchurch call comes under security theme, maybe digital trade comes under data governance, or whether some of these ideas happen to be somehow different or cross-cutting. The final contribution I was going to make here was to go back over an idea that I raised back in Geneva at our April meeting about a potential main session topic. And this would be something I think would be cross-cutting in nature. The idea, discussions around a holistic policy framework discussion on ICTs that could link to both what the UN Secretary General was calling for during his address at last year's IGF, and the reasons for the high-level panel on digital cooperation, making sure that policies are discussed across government departments, and bringing in groups and experts that aren't normally involved in internet governance. So the importance of multidisciplinary and working across silos. So the session could explore how to ensure that multidisciplinary internet governance discussions and ensuring that there's holistic policy making and how to improve coordination between networks and multidisciplinary discussions. We're yet to see the high-level panel report. It could well be that this provides a way to have a discussion around some of its recommendations. There are also 2 existing approaches that could be introduced into the discussion that I've mentioned before, which are the OECD's Going Digital Framework, and the International Chamber of Commerce has a paper on the holistic policy framework. And there you have the ideas that Timea was talking about earlier about when you look at an issue, are you thinking about the technical, or are you looking at it from a social perspective, or an economic perspective, or a cultural? You've got to look at all of these issues, all of these elements of an issue. So that would be the specific proposal for a main session at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben, for your comments. We'll capture your last suggestion. I don't know if there was a sort of firm idea that we would have main sessions are tied to the 3 per se. And if we think about what's included in each one of those 3, they're all so broad. So I mean, I think the room shouldn't feel restricted to trying to fit in, because I don't think that's what we've actually heard in all of our previous discussions. If sitting here today and having thought through the program and done the work, that's what we want to do, we can of course do that. But I think we should just keep the ideas coming out. Maybe just one other thing before, language sometimes. I don't see what Sylvia just described as the Christchurch. It had a very, very long title. I actually don't see it as a Christchurch call per se, but more something that I think could be generalized to how do the fact that there are events happening in the world that take place at a pretty rapid process where policymakers feel obligated to take some relatively quick action. And if you were to look at this from a private sector side, I guess the private sector side is trying to figure out what their response should be in that, and how do we make room in those processes for appropriate multi-stakeholder input, and what kind of pressure might that put on some of the multi-stakeholder processes. So I saw it as something that could be kind of generalized to different sort of situation, maybe with the Christchurch as an example. So, I mean, I'm just sort of encouraging us to think about it in a really broad kind of context that could be useful in many others, rather than a particular country or a particular region's approach to, one of the more recent events. And of course we have it, not just in 2017 in Geneva, but in every one of the IGFs that I can remember, we've had a significant session, if not a main session, on evolution of the multi-stakeholder model. We did that in Paris last year as well, because of course it's rather important to all of us that participate in the IGFs that we're continuing to look at how that process could be approved. So, I mean, I continue to support things that advance the appreciation for the activities. I think that was all of your points, Ben. Paul Rowney, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn. Just following on what Kento just mentioned about the newcomers track. And I have a couple of thoughts on this. One thought is we could hold the newcomers track more than once, which means people could choose which session they went into. But another thought is that part of what's covered in the intros could also form part of the newcomers track, which gives some structure on how the themes are going to flow, etc. And possibly the same should apply to the open forums and DCs. I don't know, just thinking aloud here, that there's some commonality at the beginning to introduce some flow and thought process into how the whole IGF is going to move forward. So those key points are not lost regardless of where you go at the start of the IGF. Thank you.
I think those are really good points, Paul. Mary, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. I want to re-echo what China has said and Susan supported about giving space for unforeseen action or issue that might come up before November, because the way the internet or digital space is moving, you can never predict what will happen. I would like to, I have some proposal for main session. I'm looking at tying together the multidisciplinary call from the UN Secretary General, the Digital Governance Convention call from the private sector. I think it was Microsoft or one of the organizations in 2017 or 2018 call for Digital Governance Convention or something like that. And then the Paris Peace call, if we can put those together and it be a main session so that it could be raised and discussed again. That's the one. And then I don't know what the high level, I agree with the high level panel session, no problem, but I don't know what the legislation or the I think the high level is the parliamentary session, parliamentarian session will look like, and topics they will discuss. But I know that countries will be interested in SDGs. So can we have a session that ties the tracks to SDGs? So we discuss, how it will tie into SDGs. Because when we were doing the proposal, the tracks, we also dragged it to the SDGs. Maybe we'll look at that because countries will be interested, especially the global south, how this could help, any of those discussions could help achieve SDGs. So those are my three suggestions. Tying the calls together, whether it's Paris or is Christchurch or is the multidisciplinary one with the one of the private sector, and also looking at having a session on SDG and all the tracks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Those are good suggestions. And one question I've had in the back of my mind a little bit was some of the best practice forum work on cybersecurity in terms of how much you would expect to be in a position to address through what I'm assuming is a BPF session at the IGF, particularly because the Paris call was launched there, and at some point I think we should make a conscious decision as to whether or not we're going to ensure that there's been some action or response, or if not, that we can clearly talk to that and explain that if only as a matter of courtesy at a very minimum. But I mean, I do think it raises some important points. So maybe Ben can just think about that in a little bit. I'm not quite sure what the BPF was planning or going to do. And you can respond now, or if you need time to think about it too, that's fine.
I mean, certainly it's going to be part of the BPF's work this year, and there will be a BPF session and there will be a BPF report. So we saw that as a natural place to talk, to look at the Paris call. It would not be unheard of at all for a main session to look at cybersecurity or to have some discussions about cybersecurity and providing views on the Paris call or what the French government, the direction they think it's heading, could feed into a main session. I'm not sure a main session on the Paris call alone would be relevant as much as my company as an active signatory of the Paris call would be very happy to participate in one.
No, I mean, totally agree with your comment in terms of I think it's probably not appropriate as a separate, but just trying to keep track of it as we go through these proposals. Thank you, Mary. And what we're doing in the background here is Eleanor and I are actually just going to put a list together of the suggestions. We can try and capture a little bit of the kind of background discussion behind them, but I think it will look more like a list that we will come back to tomorrow, and we'll get that out to you tonight. Tamea, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points that I wanted to make were actually very eloquently put by several of my colleagues. So I just want to quickly support the idea of having longer main sessions. The idea of, I think Paul was talking about newcomer sessions. That might also be something to consider, to have several, if there's space for that. Or even a newcomers booth. We even before had, in a previous meeting, I think 2 years ago, we had mentors or senior MAG members who had a button for newcomers. That might also be an idea that we want to revisit. Another idea that I have, and call me a radical if you want to, but we were thinking about streamlining the IGF program. So I'm thinking about the main sessions, even if they are for 2 hours, and I think that's great, because we need to give time for discussions, but do we really need 4 a day for 2 hours each? Is there any way that we consider 2 or 3 a day, or maybe a morning and an afternoon one for 2 hours, and to give people space for even filling that extra hour with ideas for media communication or interviews with some of the prominent speakers we have, a networking session, or just leaving people the time to go for a bilateral meeting or whatever else they might have on their agendas. Just a thought. In terms of concrete proposals, I'm sorry my idea is not fleshed out fully here because I wasn't prepared of making a proposal on this today. I was in the, I don't know why, but I thought we were going to do that with proposals in writing and then decide on them. But an idea that I have for a main session, and this goes also into supporting a point that somebody else has made earlier, about having main sessions per tracks. I think it would be an interesting idea to have some of the main sessions at least link or draw out the main topic from the 3 tracks to remain consistent with the program. And if we are to consider one that is linked to the inclusion track that I was working on with my colleagues, I would propose a session to look at the different elements required to improve and ensure inclusion as society undergoes digital transformation, and preventing people from being left behind. The session could look, in my view, at the future of work aspects of digital transformation, and running through the entire spectrum of education to skills training, and look also into beyond training on the demand and supply side of how the future of work idea is going forward. Could consider things like accessibility aspects, even consider maybe people with disabilities, that is coming up from a couple of workshops, connectivity, local content issues, things like that, and on top of that, skills and training. If we can have a discussion on that, I think it would be very useful. We had a couple of very successful workshops on this in the past. I think we could draw this out into the main session idea. And I promise I'll put my proposal forward in a more comprehensive way when I have the chance to write it down, and colleagues can look at it online. Thank you.
Thank you, Timea, working backwards as well. I mean, I think that is a very, very important area in terms of proposals. So I'm sure the MAG would look forward to receiving more information on it. It's just very, very important. With respect to fewer main sessions, I think we can leave that question for the MAG tomorrow, and I think it ought to probably depend more on whether or not we think there are subjects that are worthy of a main session and the time there. Part of the reason for having the slightly longer lunch break was to facilitate those networking and more informal sessions and that sort of thing, which is already a pretty significant amount of time, which would of course probably be shortened somewhat if we have the 2-hour main sessions, but we were trying to create that time. Ananda, you have the floor, and congratulations on getting your bag.
Thank you. I first of all thank the people and the government of Germany for such generous hosting of this meeting. And as Benny had already mentioned, I left my bag in the tram, and then today with the help of Jutta and the colleague there who traced the online found system and informed me that the bag was found, and I just collected the bag. So it is not only the generosity of the people, but the integrity and the professionalism of the institutions. I think we really appreciate. Back home it is very unlikely to happen, and if happens it will become a front page news. So I am really happy to share this with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ananda. Susan Chalmers, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Just for the terms, in terms of how we move forward with the main session process, one thing that at least I seem to be missing did we ever have a call for proposals, or is this discussion that call for proposals from the MEG members? Because I think I really appreciated what Sylvia circulated, and I think that's nice. It's something that's in writing that I'm able to review and that we're all able to comment on. And so I think and in the past we did have some process and guidelines around main session proposals. I don't know if we want to dust those off. They're not too old. But I was just wondering, are people expected, given the agenda tomorrow, to develop proposals this evening, or are we going to be able to have a little more time to consider and review and submit? And so I hope that helps some folks in the room.
I could go right to the short answer and say not much more time. But I think what we had decided at past MAG meetings, rather than starting the main session discussion earlier, was that we wanted to wait and see what came through with this new process with the thematic tracks. We had the narratives, we had the call for workshop submissions, which was based on the call for issues earlier in the year. And the MAG said they wanted to see what policy questions came in and what the kind of approved workshops and that track developed like before deciding what to do with the main sessions. So I think it is a slightly different process than last year. Last year we'd had a discussion which basically said if we have 8 tracks or 10 tracks or whatever it is, there was an agreement, maybe an implicit assumption that there would be a main session for each track. And I think we moved away from that somewhat this year, wanting to again build a thoughtful program on the basis of the policy questions that came in and the proposals that were approved by the MAG. So I think the process we're in is trying to get to a high-level description in quotes before we leave here tomorrow, so that we know that we're generally thinking of one on I don't know, to use one, digital governance and digital trade, or another one on digital inclusion, and kind of having enough of a discussion here in the MAG that we understand what kind of a high-level description of that would look like, that we get some co-facilitators to go away and develop that proposal, bring it back to the MAG, so that ideally by the end of, actually, I think we said by the 3rd week in June, we would have enough that we could put a title and a description up in the schedule when they release the schedule. And that would allow the working groups for each one of the main sessions to advance the proposal over July and August, which, you know, in the Northern Hemisphere is a really heavy vacation period. The timing is tight, but if we don't make a really good start on it in the next 3 weeks, for all practical purposes, the substantive discussion with the MAG would happen in September, and I think we all agree that it's just far too late to pull together a substantive program and get, I think, the level of speakers we'd like to get. Please, Chandra.
Yeah, sorry. And also, we've noticed that it has been commented on in the previous years that if people go away and construct a proposal by themselves in isolation and then bring them to the MAG, there's a sort of competition that develops, and people get very, very attached to their proposal, and they will find it difficult to let it go. So this time around, we were trying to see that if we could come to some consensus on the topics. So if we do have the 6 topics, and then the MAG can break into these groups and come up with an agenda or a proposal, then that will be much better and much more conducive to.
Yeah, thank you, Changatai. That was a great point. Forgot. Thank you. So is that clear enough then, Susan, and everybody in the room? Because
yes, thanks so much for clarifying that. I appreciate it.
And I do think we should come back afterwards and maybe take a quick look at the existing documentation on how we would document main sessions and see if that still works in terms of the kind of information we would ultimately flesh out. Jutta, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn, for giving me the floor. I have 2 things I would like to add to the discussion. First thing, as co-facilitator for the dynamic coalitions, I would like to emphasize the interest of the dynamic coalitions to have their joint main session. It was discussed yesterday, or reported yesterday, that there are still two potential ways to come to that joint session, and that will be discussed in the next call of the dynamic coalitions, probably at the beginning of July, in the first week of July or last week of June, and then we can go forward with that. And second thing about the main sessions, I would like to support what Timea said before, that it would be a good idea to have main sessions around the 3 main thematic tracks. I do think we have come so far with the process of assessing these proposals that now we already know that there is enough flesh to the bones that we can have a main session out of the 3 tracks. That's kind of different than 3 months ago, when we just were starting with these main themes and we did not know what would come out of it and how good the proposals would be and how good the policy questions would be. But now that we've come through the process of assessing the proposals, I do think there is enough in there, and it would also help to have this concise program where people really understand, okay, there is this track and that track and that track, and there is also a main session that deals with some of the cross-cutting issues that are within these main themes. So I really would like to plead for having main sessions for the 3 main topics.
And do you have any thoughts on what they might be or how we might structure them, or have some of the things that we've already hit upon today, are they possible candidates? Just trying to advance the discussion a little.
If we could come back to that tomorrow, that would be easier, right? It's just that I derived the ideas from what we had yesterday evening when we tried to agree within the group on the proposals. That was shaping already what would be the issues and what could be the speakers, and probably we also have among those workshop proposals that did not come through, some of them because of diversity or something else. We still have high-level speakers in these proposals, and we have very good policy questions. So it could also be that we draw on these proposals again and ask the high-level speakers in these proposals whether they would contribute to a main session on the same theme. So that could be one option to bring it more in shape.
Of course, the logical next step following that discussion would be that we'd ask the thematic working groups to take responsibility for organizing a main session aligned with those main themes. So I think the question, just to make sure, I think the proposal but I think the suggestion that Jutta is making, I think says, understand what we did with the narratives back at the beginning of the process, understand what's come through the workshop proposals, understand how the thematic working groups actually felt about what were the main themes and main discussions that should be brought forward, and build a main session off of that kind of flow. And you're just nodding your head yes, which of course means that it would be up to the working groups then to advance those main sessions. So we'll leave that as maybe a kind of a separate, not a separate, but a counter proposal, more a process.
I just got the impression that that would not be too much additional work, because we already have gathered a lot out of the assessment process of the proposals. Okay, it will need to have a deeper look, but it would not be a completely new process, and not so much additional work, I do think. And I saw Ben a bit of nodding, so maybe he feels the same about data governance group.
I can't tell if his nodding was on the positive side or I'm not sure side. My reading was I'm not sure side. I think that's really funny. different interpretations, but let's leave that as an open proposal, Jutta. We'll continue going through the queue, and then people should come in and comment on it as we move through the queue. Miguel, you're next. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. It's Miguel Candia for the record. Thank you for leaving open the Jutta's proposal, because I have to wrap around my head around it. While doing so, I wanted to support the idea of having something on the SDGs, because to put in a sentence is to recognize or to have an idea of the impact of the ICTs and the internet ecosystem on the fulfillment of the 2030 agenda for the Sustainable Development Goals. That is, I think that would have a strong political impact on our agenda, because every single country in the world is doing its part to try and get the SDGs done in their own countries, particularly in the national level. So that would give us a visibility, as I believe it, and second of all, it would help to know on the internet governance-wise or sense what we can do to further the SDGs from our standpoint. So that would be a thumbs up for that proposal. On the number of main sessions, it would be interesting to look if we can have fewer, maybe, but as long as we don't have a negative impact on the strength of a program. In that scenario, we should keep maybe shorter main sessions, but still the number to have the eight main issues that we think are strong enough to be there at that level of an attention or focus for our program. We did speak about the main session process in March, if I recall correctly, and decided or went the way of waiting up until this point in time to see how the program was developing. So I think, although I understand Susan's question very clearly, it was something that we made by choice this year. So maybe we can take that into account for the next years. That would be all from me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Miguel. Appreciate your points on the SDGs, and there is always room for improvement in these processes. Thank you. Chennai, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to follow up on the point that Timea raised around the newcomer session and having the MAG members or volunteers sort of mentoring. And I was just thinking perhaps it would also be good to engage with the working group on outreach and engagement, perhaps to think of actually setting up that that like little badge, and if anyone else is willing to volunteer from the community for the Newcomers Day, because I have been to meetings, for example, ICANN meetings where someone did have a little tag at the end of their badge that said, if you have any questions, you can ask me. And that was really useful to be able to speak to people. But of course, the volunteers have to be willing to be stopped in the hallways, because I think there's nothing as annoying as someone who wears a badge that says, I can help you, but they have no time to help. So I think maybe that's the criteria to think about in whoever is going to be volunteering or going to be part of that. And I'm not sure if by then the new MAG members would have been selected by the time that we have the November meeting, but perhaps it would also be good to encourage them to attend that newcomers meeting, because although people have been in the circuit for a very long time, it would be good for them. Some might never have gone to a newcomers meeting, and if this is something that we prioritize in the MAG going forward, it would be good for them to actually, you know, engage in these sessions and actually see why we stress on outreach and why we stress on people learning more about the IGF space and how maybe they could contribute in future. Thank you.
Some very good points, and Chennai. Let me just see if Changatai has any observations on the newcomers badge and the volunteers we can help.
Thank you very much, Chennai. For some reason, I think your accent is very unfamiliar to me, so I'm having difficulty hearing it. But yes, for the newcomers badge, we will talk and see whether or not we can do that, and also have volunteers who are willing to help. Yes, thanks. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Changatai. Lucien, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. So I have 2 quick points, really. The first one is on SDGs. I'm also supporting the session on SDGs. We are quite closing on the 10 years mark, and national implementation is key to the 2030 agenda. So it would be nice to have a session on SDGs. Also, I would like to reflect quickly on the discussion on the Paris School, obviously, and on the Christchurch School also. I was myself involved in both of them. And, security in cyberspace, and in particular harmful content, is a growing concern. It's a key concern in restoring trust in cyberspace, and a main session on that topic, focusing either on hate speech, disinformation, content regulation would be quite good. I'm quite interested in proposing or supporting a session, following up on the remarks of Sylvia and other participants on that topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucien. Sylvia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn. Silvia Cadena, Technical Community. I will also like to support the structure around of a main session around SDGs for many of the reasons that my colleagues have mentioned, but with the idea in my mind that session could actually perfectly fit into the inclusion category, and that I would like to encourage the MAG to try to keep the focus of the program in all of these new, as I call them, the red and the yellow sessions, because those are taking quite a lot of considerable time from the program. So I hope that even if it's not full-on based on each one of the topics and is deviating to a certain extent, that there is a link that bring it back to the program. From the experience for last year, I would like just to clarify a couple of points that I may not have mentioned when I presented the idea about the session on platforms and content blocking and filtering. That I mentioned it on the email, that this one, last year I helped to co-organize the main session on technical and operation that was focusing on content blocking and filtering. That session was only on operational issues. It was co-organized by 2 members, MAC members of the technical community, and it really required a lot of work to identify a good moderator that was neutral enough to carry on that conversation and was able to manage an interactive format. Some of the main sessions in other areas, other topics of other baskets did similar or different formats. So I actually would like to highlight the contribution that Enrico mentioned before about trying to identify good journalists from probably the Deutsche Welle television or something that are able to manage such sessions and give them the high profile that is probably required. As a background, I remember that at the IGF, one of the IGFs in Brazil, not the one in João Pessoa, there were some of the main sessions were moderated by a BBC journalist, and that those were really well managed because for the way he structured the discussion. The proposal that I submitted thinking that it was aligned with a theme. So I submitted on the subject, it says security theme. I don't think the working group on security should take responsibility for the sessions on the main sessions on security for 2 reasons, or any of the working groups. The working groups for the workshop selection were done randomly, not necessarily based on expertise or contacts or the network that specific MAC members have in a specific topic. We did struggle with many of the content in sessions assigned to us that are not our area of expertise, but I think that for a main session, it is really important that the people can put forward their network of contacts, the people that they know, the knowledge that they have to be able to structure a session. So I actually don't agree with the idea that it would be easy, let's say, to put that responsibility into the working groups that were created for workshop selection. I would rather think that maybe could be something to be considered, for example, to partner with the VPFs that are more focusing on those specific topics if we are looking at strengthening mechanisms that already exist as part of the IGF and the MAC work. The proposal that I submitted was based on community input. It's in a proposal that will not make the cut, number 144 that I mentioned in the presentation and included on the email. So it's not something that I pull out of a hat. And I really hope that the main sessions, to a certain extent, even if they are capturing emerging issues, use the call for issues, the workshop proposals, the open forums presentations, proposals as basis to build, so that we are actually reflecting on the content that the community is demanding from us. And as I mentioned, I started using the template from last year. It has been, of course, it's not complete, but I think it's not necessarily that every time we do something we need to reinvent the wheel. I feel really uncomfortable with changes of processes going on when the agenda was already submitted without a tracking of agreements from previous calls, where we don't have summaries of previous meetings to actually refer to those of us that couldn't participate in conference calls to refer to something that said the MAC agreed on a conference call that the main sessions were not going to be attached to the themes. I didn't have that information when I started working on this, and to be honest, I don't have enormous amounts of time to go through all the transcripts to try to figure out what was agreed in the end. So it is really important that we keep those summary meetings going to engage participation and to be effective to work on the mailing list. Otherwise, for those of us that struggle with time zone differences, it's really difficult to do this. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Just comment on 1 or 2 of your points. I don't think there was an agreement from the MAG that the main sessions would tie directly to the themes. I think this year, we consciously decided to leave it fairly open while we figured out what this new thematic process looked like. what policy questions came through, and what was finally accepted as the overall kind of themes and questions in the, that does, make the process a little bit tight at this particular moment, but I think it's still possible. To the other point earlier, I think there's a way, if the MAG did decide that they wanted to use the expertise of the positions that were coming out of the thematic working groups to say, we think there should be something on digital inclusion, I think we can merge several processes, which would maybe pull in some of the thematic working group members who had the history of the proposals and the policy questions and the narrative and really understood that in depth, and pulled in appropriate other expertise. And in particular, and we're coming to this in the next session, in particular, they can obviously tap the BPFs, they can tap the dynamic coalitions, they can tap the NRIs, they can tap other expertise in their kind of main session planning group. So I don't think it's an either or. I think if the MAG should decide to do something, that there's a way to get the right expertise and the right history to come together in an appropriate working group. What I'd like to do is to go through the three people that are in the queue now, and then I'd like to come to the final session of the day, which is the one that would review the other sessions. I'd like to actually start with a review of the dynamic coalitions and the NRI plans for their sessions, but also any thoughts they have on their main sessions, so we actually have that in the mix as well for our discussions. And then we would, time permitting, and I certainly hope we would go quickly through the Day Zero open forums and the plans for the newcomer and lightning sessions. And then that should give us a fairly good kind of overview of the main session territory that we're going to work in more depth on tomorrow. And I will point out, for those of you that maybe weren't aware, there are snacks in the back of the room, coffee and water in front of you, so if you're dying for a snack, you can certainly avail yourself of that. Mary, you have the floor.
Right. Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor again. Mary from Technical Community. I just want to draw our attention back to what Utah said about having main session on the tracks. If we're going to do the topping and we're going to do the telling, would main session on these tracks still be needed? Since we'll do topping and telling, I think we should take that into consideration, because those that will not be at the workshop, the different workshops, will be at the topping or the telling. And so I don't know, but if we are going, if we consider it very necessary, then if it's overflooding, then overflooding it, then would just look at the topping and the telling and take order and propose other main sessions apart from the track. It's a fact that we have gotten most of the policy questions, and we're going to use that as part of the topping and telling as well. So maybe we'll see whether it will just be overflowing the tracks if we are going to have main session again for the tracks. Thank you.
Mary, let me just make sure I capture what you're saying. So I'm not sure this is right, so if it's not right, please submit it. I think you're saying that we should consider what we're going to do with the topping and tailing sessions for those tracks, and if there's an overflow or too many suggestions for main sessions, that we make sure that we take that into account as we optimize across them, or was it a different point?
What I'm saying is that if we are doing the topping and telling, is there any need for main session for the tracks again? That's my question.
And that's what I thought it was, but you said it much more succinctly. Thank you. No, so I mean, I think it's a good point, and I think it partly depends on what we do specifically with the topping session. And I think we can just maybe put that as a question and come back to that tomorrow. I think that plays to kind of Yuta's suggestion that maybe we think about whether or not we want to build on a main session on the basis of the narrative, the policy questions, and the track we built. And I do think that's a good point, because if we were to do a substantive topping session, then that might actually be somewhat redundant. I think it's just something to keep in mind. So thank you, Mary. Ben, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn. Yes, I think we need to think about how the topping and tailing sessions might be a main session or might be distinct from main sessions. I have a sense that main sessions, which are given 2 hours, which are given a more prominent part of the program, are a little different in nature. But yes, as we're kind of working out what we think topping and tailing looks like, we should have in mind, you know, having a distinction. So on linking main sessions to the 3 themes, I wanted to support Jutta to some extent, because, you know, over the last 5 months, we've made this effort to have a more narrowly focused IGF this year. We've selected 3 themes, and I think it would be strange not to have at least one session related to each of the 3 themes. You know, we've required all the workshop proposals to follow the 3 themes. These are our 3 themes, and none of the main sessions are on the 3 themes. That would feel strange. So I think I see definitely some link, and I think there should be at least one main session for each theme. I think that would feel quite natural, but I don't think all main sessions necessarily need to cover the themes, and I think it could actually be valuable to leave some main sessions for more cross-cutting topics which will not get captured under the 3 themes, which are somehow broader or different. In terms of a process, yes, I think it could naturally fall to each of the thematic working groups to organize a main session related to their theme. But firstly, while yes, the groups would be able to draw on what they've already seen in the workshop evaluation, I do find it a little daunting to try and pull together a session which somehow covers all of the 6 baskets, or, you know, the 6 points of a flow chart or whatever in 1 2-hour session. It's a challenge, and indeed the security theme might be the most disparate and broadest of the 3. And also, while I think it naturally could fall to each of the thematic working groups to organize a main session related to their theme, I think that other MAG members should be able to join the discussion. So maybe the thematic group, when it gets to this task of developing a main session, it gets opened up to anyone else who wants to join from the MAG. It might be worth reflecting a little bit on how these ad hoc groups will be organized, and the thematic groups have been set up, so maybe we have a sense. But particularly for those in their first year on the MAG, and this is only my 2nd year, my understanding is that it's the responsibility of us as the MAG to organize the main sessions. And I think the way it worked last year was that it fell to MAG members to volunteer for ad hoc groups, and that they could sign up for as many groups as they wanted. I can't remember whether those ad hoc groups were open to anyone in the public or were just for MAG members. I led one of those groups, finding a way to bring together the topics of cybersecurity, privacy, and trust in an 80-minute coherent discussion. And I had support from 2 other MAG members. I think there were maybe 15 people on the list, but 3 of us did the work. So for main sessions related to the 3 themes, as I said, I think this naturally falls to the existing thematic working groups, as Jutta suggested, but they could be opened up at that stage. And if there are other main sessions, I wonder if it's going to be similar to the process last year. I think with MAG members would hopefully join and contribute to at least one of these working groups, of these ad hoc working groups each, to make sure there's, you know, active contributions from around the table. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Just a couple of quick points. And of course, whatever we do with the main sessions, we should always make sure that we're pulling in BPF work, DCs, NRIs, and et cetera in those main sessions as well. To your question about is it only MAG members or not only MAG members. And then I think I really align with Mary's comment earlier, which is if we're going to have, and we haven't agreed yet, but if we were to have a topping session that really did build on the narrative of that theme, I'm not sure that having a main theme that builds further on it or deeply on it is really that different. And if we're looking for linkage, I also support the comments that have said the main themes, the main session should look like they tie to the rest of our program. I don't think there's any difficulty. If we look at what's been suggested before, I think there's pretty good alignment between some things around digital inclusion, some things around the security track as well. I think the only one we haven't heard a really kind of specific proposal on would be around data governance that aligns so clearly, although maybe the digital trade and digital governance is one that did. So, and frankly, I think there's enough commonality there that we could take some of those ideas and make them fit, unless we really wanted a really kind of thorough main session built up from the narratives and what the thematic working groups thought, in which case, again, then I think we need to make sure it's different enough from the topping session. So I guess, the takeaway is I think we've actually got a lot of flexibility and a lot of coverage. I don't feel that there's like big gaps opening up from this discussion. We'll go to Paul and then Carlos, and then we'll move to the dynamic coalitions and the NRIs so we can hear what their plans are for all their sessions plus main sessions. Paul, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you, Lynn. I just want to follow up on what Ben and some others were saying. I also think that it's extremely important that, as we've undertaken this new process of having the 3 themes, and we've taken the time to choose them, and we followed through on that on the very arduous workshop evaluation process. So that part of the IGF is going to reflect the 3 themes. I think we have to follow through as well on the main sessions. I would support the idea of having a main session on each of the 3 themes. And then, as Ben said, the other main sessions could be on things that are quite different. The only alternative would be maybe if there are no main sessions specifically on any of the 3 themes, that the main sessions are clearly tied in. And I think, Lynn, I like the word that you used, which was alignment. We have to make sure one way or the other, whichever option we go with, that the main sessions are in some way aligned, and the topics are, that we can show that at least some of the topics are directly or indirectly linked. I'd also add that I would support the idea of Miguel to have at least one main session relating to the SDGs, because I think that is a gap in our program so far. There may have been some workshop proposals in the digital inclusion theme that mentioned the SDGs. I don't recall offhand whether or how many of the top 20 would have related to that. But I think it's an important topic for us to ensure that we're covering, and as Sylvia said, that's something that is clearly aligned with digital inclusion, so it would fit seamlessly into our program as well.
Those are good points, Paul. The queue keeps growing, and we do need to get to the DCs and the NRIs so we have their perspective on these discussions. So I really would like to draw a firm line under Timea there, and then specifically ask those people to talk to the DCs and the dynamic coalitions. Please do ensure we get to those important topics. Carlos, you have the floor.
This is a rare moment in which I have to disagree with Sylvia. I was in one of the panels moderated quotation marks by that BBC host, and it was not good at all. It was a TV show, no? And the guy was very good at animating a TV show, but not at understanding what kind of interaction was happening among the people that knew about the issues that were being discussed. And he interfered very heavily sometimes. Several people in the panel were irritated by that. And I think that the IGF learned from that thing and did not use these formats later on. So I recommend we don't do BBC shows in the IGF.
Thank you, Carlos. June, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn. I need a bit more clarity, getting back to what Ben was saying about the main sessions and how do we get involved with the main sessions. Last year I got involved with the main session and I thought it was the Secretariat who had something to do with that. Can I have some clarity, please?
The Secretariat has something to do with everything. Is the question specifically on who structured or populated the sessions?
Yeah, how we got involved with the main sessions. Was it because we joined the working groups, or did the actual Secretariat have something to do with it? My name was put on a main session, but I really can't remember how I got there.
It should have been by your own act of volunteering to be on the main session working group.
Oh, okay, thank you.
What we did last year was there were a series of proposals and we put those in front of the MAG and then asked the MAG to sign up for those main session working groups that they were interested in supporting. I mean, I'm sure quite often MAG members sign up because they're kind of interested in tracking the developments in case it impacts on other things they're doing and not perhaps expect to be a full member, but it would have been presumably through your own act.
Okay.
You were very good at volunteering at a number of things last year and came through on all of them, so thank you. Paul, you have the floor.
Yeah, firstly, apology for dragging out this matter, but I'm not convinced that having main sessions on the 3 themes is going to be good. I still need some convincing there. I feel that it can distract from the workshops. It can also overlap with what's being discussed at the workshops, and it draws people away from the workshops. I think the main sessions should be limited, and they are in the charts, and I agree that we should be driving cross-cutting issues and issues that are not really directly being addressed in those workshops. So I actually support what Mary was saying. Thank you.
No, that's a good point, Paul, too, because we had said we would try and really pull out those kind of things that we thought were cross-cutting. Tamea, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn. Try to be short, and apologies for taking the floor again after having spoken on this matter already. Regarding the topping, tailing, and the main session on the tracks, I see those 3 very, very differently. I think the topping session is more of a setting the scene sort of session where people would go there to understand what is it that the track is about, what's going to happen, how are we reporting out there, what are the actual sessions going on, what were the sub-teams, what's the flow, and even I can see pulling in a couple of workshops or them getting the floor from the audience saying, well, I'm going to focus on this one, I'm going to focus on that one, who's interested to come and talk with me about that. And where the tailing session would actually be the exact opposite, but trying to draw out messages, and we're going to work on a creative way of reporting out from the tracks, but really sort of taking the messages out from the track. Now, in between those 2, I see a main session, sort of a bigger platform, a more prominent 2 hours of discussing either a cross-cutting theme within that track, or a particular issue that wasn't very distilled out in the workshops, or something that would give us really a moment that when people think back to the IGF 2019, like, okay, those 2 hours on inclusion or those 2 hours on data, really worth my time. They are prominent speakers, a very important issue, and a really good session. So for me, those are 3 different objectives. And I think that still flows into a coherent program. So I actually would like to see this happen. I think we can get, as I said, creative of how we're choosing out the topics on what the sessions are going to be about. But just my 2 cents about this.
Thank you, Tamea. I think we would all, I think there is MAG agreement that on the tailing session it is about drawing out messages and actions. I think on the topping session, there's not yet agreement. What you just described was what I would call a fairly traditional introductory set of sessions. This is what's happening in the track, and you know, if you're interested in this, go here, and that sort of thing. And I think there was still an open question as to whether or not there might be a keynote speaker or something that would really drive interest and a real kind of heightened sense of anticipation, if you will, for the track and those activities. And I don't think the MAG is closed on that yet. No, I just to make sure that it wasn't. Xiaofeng, you haven't taken the floor, so we'll allow you to take the floor, and then I am definitely going next speaker to either the DCs or the NRIs to understand their views on their programs. So Xiaofeng, you have the floor. Can you push on your, there you go, that should work. King, could you just, no, it's not, it's the same problem as Sylvia's earlier, I think. Perhaps you could just move to another mic next to you.
I'm sorry. About main session, I'd like to support Mary about SDG main session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Xiaofeng. So should we start with the NRIs and Anya? Because at least I know to turn to Anya's. And then for the DCs, I'm not sure who I would turn to speak to what their desires are in terms of sessions and main session. So Anya.
Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. So the NRI started running the public consultations on the forms of their integration into the 14th IGF in early January this year. We again called for topics, for inputs from the NRIs to identify what could be the mutual interest in terms of the topic for all NRIs. Those consultations went on for almost 12 weeks, and they resulted in identifying several inputs that could be of interest for 114 NRIs. So in that regard, the forms of the sessions that the NRIs would like to kindly request from the MAG would be the main joint session, as it was hosted for the past 3 IGF, and the topic would be focusing on emerging technologies and their interfaces with inclusion, security, and human rights. As we were not really aware of the MAG's timeline regarding calling for proposals, then the NRI started drafting their proposal. So that proposal is to a good extent done, and I think whenever you would say to set the deadline, we would be able to submit the proposal to the MAG. I will maybe not go into details now about the particular aspects this session will address, but unless I'm asked to. But I would just say that the format will aim, again, for an interactive session and inclusion of inputs from all NRIs. The suggestion this year from the colleagues is to create an input document to the meeting, a few weeks before the meeting is supposed to start, based on short case study examples from the NRIs that will be sent to the Secretariat and that will be analyzed and kind of consolidated into a unique publication. So that would probably save also our time of not bringing all inputs to the session, but focusing on key issues. In regards to the format, that's something we're discussing, but on the duration of the session, the NRIs will, of course, wait for your guidelines in this regard. They, however, do advise that this session is, if possible, 120 minutes long. Last year, we had 90 minutes at disposal. That was effective, but of course also challenging given the number of speakers. In previous years, we operated on 3 hours slot, but I have to say that in 2017, that 3-hour slot was divided. So after, let's say, 2 hours, we had a 1-hour break, and we wouldn't advise for that to be applied this year. So that would be for the main session. So the key is to cover the emerging technologies and aspects of inclusion, security, and human rights. For aside of the main session, as you said, I should probably cover all sessions. The NRIs would again request collaborative sessions. So this open call for inputs that we were running with all the NRIs resulted in having suggestions for 6 sessions. Those sessions are available and generic proposals available on the IGF website. But very clearly, very shortly, just to say that these sessions would again focus on concrete case study examples from countries and regions that could come to the global IGF, just to give us a bit of a practical overview of the issues that they decided to focus on. And those issues for those sessions would be access, specifically focused on inclusion of vulnerable groups and developing digital capacity. Then cybersecurity and cyber safety and resilience for infrastructure providers and users. Human rights on the internet from a perspective on national and regional priorities. Data protection from the perspective on national and regional levels. Regulation of harmful content on the internet. And privacy concerns on the local level, with probably focus on surveillance mostly. Aside of these collaborative sessions, the NRIs will traditionally now organize the so-called coordination session, which is an, as you know, open work meeting between the NRIs representatives from UNDES, IGF Secretariat, Chair of the MAG members, and anyone interested in the community. The agenda will be again developed in a bottom-up manner by the NRIs, so we will probably start that work very soon. But in general, the agenda should focus on how can we strengthen the collaborative mechanism between all the NRIs and the IGF, and how can we as a global community strengthen the local processes of the NRIs. And also, maybe just to add, since we're covering everything, as I said, the NRIs also will organize a booth at the IGF Village, and for that, given very good equipment that we have there and conditions, we will be preparing a dedicated presentation, which will be a visual overview of all the IGFs that happen throughout the year in 2019. Oh, thank you very much.
Anya, thank you. I'll give a moment to see if there are any kind of questions from the floor or other follow-up. I do have one question for you. For the NRI collaborative sessions that are focusing on kind of case studies and that sort of thing, is there anything we can do or requests we could put out that would allow us to kind of specifically learn from success stories or case stories or best practices or something, if we had a different level of, I don't know, rapporteur or support or something we could document ahead of time going into the sessions, have the session, make that interactive, and then learnings that we could pull out?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. You actually reminded me on a very important point. For the main session, last year we collaborated with the MAG, respecting working modalities of both networks, and that really worked perfectly, I think. So we're honestly hoping for that good collaboration this year. For the collaborative session, as this year, I think the network is really motivated by great hosts, by great conditions that are upfront us, and we're really focusing on case studies. The IGF Secretariat is also motivated to support those processes and really give them a proper format to gather the case studies and maybe even come with good outputs of those preparatory processes that could be of use for the global community. In that sense, the whole work is open, of course, to everyone, including the MAG, the chair of the MAG. If you have any proposals, I would be very happy to bring it to the network to discuss.
Let me just follow up and ask you a question too. Is there something you need in terms of additional resource, or, I mean, it's not necessarily given that you get it, but is there a consultant that could actually help support that process, or do we, I mean, the German government is actually putting money into supporting, a lot of the communications. Is there a way we can direct the communications to really get some good case studies out of those collaborative sessions? Or so maybe just think about how we could, maximize those sessions as the preparations are made and we're going into them, the benefit of the sessions where we're there, and then the output, because you talk about them as case studies, and that kind of implies a whole set of kind of documentation and support and output around them. And I just want to make sure that we've at least tried to get the resources we can to really capture that really, you know, as fulsomely as we can.
Well, yes, and really thank you. That's actually a great proposal. And I think in working with the NRIs, on the side of the NRIs and Secretariat, there's always need for more people to be involved in, especially experts on particular subjects, because these sessions are very much subject focused. So let me maybe consult with the network and see if possibly, I think we could probably use a pair of hands for just analyzing all those inputs, putting them in a good format and so on, without of course interfering with the content that's going to be communicated by the community. The same goes also with your concrete proposal on maybe having good rapporteurs for these sessions so that we kind of complement everything together at the end of the IGF. So I will come back maybe to you in writing after this meeting when I consult with the colleagues. Thank you.
I'm always a firm believer and there's no harm in asking, and we do have an awful lot of good support and some leeway, so maybe we'll have a better chance this year than in other years. Let's see, Xiaofeng, is that hand from previously? I think so, because I don't think I ever saw it go down. So Sandra, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn, for giving me the floor. And first of all, I would like to emphasize the great work of Anya, how she's managing the NRIs. I participate on a regular basis, and it's really a bit like herding cats. And she's doing it really, really well, and without this network would not have gone so far. On the main session, I would like to make a contribution which might be also a little bit controversial. I know that not everyone in this room is in favor for giving a main session to the NRIs as we had the last 3 years. I am also skeptical, I must admit. But however, we have reached consensus within the NRI network that we would like to apply for a main session again. And I would like to share some very relevant reasons with you that you might maybe not really aware of. For some countries, and in particular the emerging economies, it is really, really important to have this visibility on a UN level, and not just by participating in such a forum, but by speaking in a main session which has full translation. For them, it's really important to get this recognition. With these tools, they can basically engage their local stakeholders, governments, business, civil society. This gives them a lot of legitimacy they wouldn't get otherwise. That's why it is really an important sign of diplomacy and of developing the multi-stakeholder model in certain countries. This is definitely not the case for Germany. This is definitely not the case for the US or for Europe possibly, but we have to take this into account when we are serious about developing the multi-stakeholder model worldwide. This is one thing. On the other hand, many of here in this room criticized that in the past the main session have not been really interactive. You had 20 speakers in a row and the output was not really of great value because it was too general. I do agree with that. And maybe we have to find ways to serve the need of specific regions, of specific NRIs, and if the MAC decides maybe not to give another main session to the NRI, maybe the MAC could then consider giving visibility for emerging economies on the panels of the other main sessions. Because that's the important point, that they get the justification and the visibility why they are attending the IGF and why it is important to put local efforts into it. And I must say this is not what I'm saying here. I'm saying this totally in my personal capacity. It was just an idea that popped in my mind when we were discussing here in a small group. This is not discussed within the NRI network. That's not a proposal that comes out of this network. That's really just a very personal view and a personal proposal, not even of Eurodic, but of Sandra Hofer-Richter. And I would like you to take that into consideration, that there are reasons why it is important, and in particular the first session that we had in Mexico when 20, 40 speakers were on stage, that was a political statement, that was a sign, that was important, even if it was not the most interactive and valuable session. But I do understand that these sessions are so important in the program, and that so many people and groups have a demand to get one of those main sessions, that we really have to make them a very, very good session. And we also, as the NRI network, we have to find better ways of organizing these sessions as we have done it in the past. Although there was also some improvement in the past, I would not like to neglect that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandra. Those were great points. I'd like to make 2 comments as well. The session you comment, I think we should stop using it as an example of maybe not a good session, because I thought it was one of the best sessions I've been at, and I sat there for 3 hours. Everything happens at a certain time. This was a time when people weren't really familiar with the NRIs. To have the NRIs up there in a very graphic, visible way, going through all of their stories, was really, really impactful. And they all did great at walking through in the 3 minutes or something that they had. And there was so much learning between them and from every one of them that I think it was I really think, and I've said that every single time, because I think it was a great session. So again, it might not be an appropriate session for now, because I think the NRIs are much better understood and recognized across the system. But just as a point, because I feel bad every time I hear that for the NRIs, because it was a great session and they were so happy to be able to expose their activities, which is important, as you say, for all the visibility back there. And I was trying to kind of huddle here with Chengetai, and sometimes I maybe go for presumptive closes or think something is such a no-brainer that I just assume it's done. I have to admit, I have been going through this process assuming that the MAG was fully supportive of there being a dynamic coalition session and an NRI session of a full main session time allotment. And so maybe the question is, before I come to the next people in the queue, as to whether or not that's a misreading on the part of the MAG. I mean, is there, and we can do this quickly, is there objection to there being a main slot for, let's do them one at a time, for NRIs? And organized in the way that Anya said, which was a topic which is obviously brought before the MAG. She's given us regular updates, developed in cooperation with the MAG as it was last year, so not something that's done in the background. Is there anybody who wants to speak, I guess, strongly against that, or just speak for it? Ben? And Henriette, if you don't mind, can I come back to you a moment in the queue so we just close on this? Thank you. Ben?
So I'm not objecting. I've said before, and I still believe, that I think it's more productive to integrate the NRIs and the DCs into main sessions rather than having them in a standalone session. But having said that, I think I took on board what Marcus said at the meeting in April, was that we should think about whether the DCs want a main session. At that point, he didn't know, and what they would want to do with it. And I think I can see why both the DCs and the NRIs, different as they are, would want a space to come together at an annual meeting. And that I think that's a good idea. Whether that needs to be in the format of a main session, or whether that can be something else where they can kind of congregate and exchange, I don't know.
That is something else already. That's not what we're talking about when we talk about a main session. Those management sessions are something else.
Yeah, so if they already have those management sessions, that's great. Yes, I think ideally we managed to find a way to integrate them so they're part of the discussions rather than kept to the side. But I'm not going to say they can't have a session. I know there's a strong desire there, and if they feel that's the best way for them to get exposure and to make the most of the global IGF meeting, then I would leave that with them.
And just to be clear, I don't think it's an either or. I mean, I think we want the BPFs, DCs, and NRIs all fully integrated into all the sessions, whether it's a workshop or a main session as well. So I don't think it's an either or. Nebojša, you have the floor.
Thank you. Nebojša Rego, MAG member government stakeholders group. I'm definitely in favor of having a separate or standalone NRI organized main session, the same way that I think Dynamic Coalition and Best Practice Forum deserve such. On the first place, I think that is the way, what Sandra actually mentioned, to give them special exposure rather than to be blended into other main sessions where somebody else is organizer and where their visibility is not that obvious. And kind of make a connection to my previous comment about diversity. This, again, what Sandra mentioned about the need for visibility of developing South, or whatever we are going to call them. That's one of the reasons, I guess, and that's my understanding of the request for diversity in the workshop proposals, to have speakers, organizers, moderators from different stakeholders group, as well as region and other groupings, exactly for that reason, to provide them with additional possibility to participate in such important forum. And I don't know, I think that that definitely should have main sessions as a main session that they organize on the subject of their choosing. Thank you.
Thank you, Nebojša. And I really want to kind of call the question one more time clearly. This isn't something that any of us were trying to sneak in. I mean, every time we've talked about the schedule and the number of main sessions, including Chengetai's comments when he put the schedule up, and every time we've talked about it in previous MAG calls, we've always said there's a DC main session, and there's an NRI main session, and there's other sessions. And maybe that was too quick a carry-on from past years, but I want to just make it clear that we certainly haven't tried to hide that. It was always a very specific request. Every time the DCs and the NRIs have presented, at the meeting in January and at the meeting in April, there's been a discussion on both their individual requirements for individual sessions plus the main sessions. So it's something we've been tracking. So let me just see, are there any objection or anybody that feels that the MAG needs a more substantive discussion on whether or not there should be a main session organized by the NRIs along the lines Anya outlined, which is with the participation and support and engagement of the MAG? Okay, so we'll call that a positive close. To me, I just think it's so important to do everything we can to support their efforts and give them the visibility. And to Sandra's point, we recognize how important it is back in a lot of countries and in a lot of capitals to give them the visibility and support that shows that all their activities are actually impactful and are actually participating on a global stage in these. And I mean, I've seen it firsthand too many times myself in countries to not recognize that that is a really serious benefit and a really serious requirement is, I just think it's inappropriate. I will leave the call on the DCs until we actually go through the DC call and go back to the queue, which is Henriette. Henriette, you have the floor.
Thank you, Lynn. Henriette Esterhuizen. I'm a member of there's an echo, of the MAG of the African IGF. I just wanted to reinforce what Sandra said. I'm not at all opposed to there being a main session on NRIs. I think, Anya, you do fantastic work, and I think many people that do NRIs do fantastic work. But there's also challenges. There are many NRIs that are not working that well. It's not just a success story. So really critical reflection on what works and what doesn't work is very useful. And I think getting everyone together is important as well, because so many people in this room and elsewhere are putting time and work and energy into NRIs. And so I think it is important for the MAG to recognize that. But I agree with Sandra, we need to see them in the main sessions. Otherwise it's quite patronizing. Create a session where you can put all your developing country speakers and actors and then you feel, okay, you've given them space. But that's not actually what they want. They don't just want space. We want influence as well. You know, we want to be heard on substantive issues. So I think as long as that is kept in mind, and the NRI main session just doesn't play this role of being the space where you give people from the Global South the floor. It needs to be more than that. We need to hear the voices and the views of people from the Global South in all the substantive sessions.
Thank you, Andrea. I have Natasha on the floor, and then I'm guessing Mary was calling for the floor as well here. But Natasha, you've been in the queue for a while, so you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Natasha Glover, a MAG member. My comment is not concerning NRI main session. I think, of course, Sanja is doing a great job, and congratulations to her. I would like to comment about main sessions in combination with topping sessions. So I'm so apologize if I'm dragging the discussion backwards a little bit, but I wanted to say that even though I think introductory sessions or topping sessions are a really good idea, I think duration of nearly 2 hours is a little bit too long. So I would propose that we try to transform these topping sessions into main sessions of each particular theme, with maybe 20 minutes introduction, like setting the tone, and for the thematic workshops that are to come after that introductory session, and and after that having a main session for each particular conference theme in duration about at least 90 minutes.
Thank you, Natasha. Those are helpful comments, and we'll take them into account when we move forward for the discussion tomorrow. Mary, you have the floor.
Thank you, the chair, for giving me the floor again. Mary from Technical Community, and I'm coordinator for 2 NRIs. One is my national NRI, and the second one, sorry. The second one is the regional NRI. We started the collaborative session in 2016. And if you can imagine the number of NRIs that have come on board from 2016, we are about 40 or so, but we are counting 100 plus. Why? Because of the visibility that was given to, what is wrong with it? Switch it off. Leave it. Switch it off. Leave the switching off here. Okay, so we are counting, and we are still counting. Why? Because countries are seeing value in what IGF is doing. In terms of government support, some of the NRIs have gotten their government support for them to participate. In terms of influence, at the local level, you find out that you get all the stakeholder groups coming together to organize the regional or national NRI. So it might not be beneficial for the global north, but the global south is beneficial to us. So if when you look at the proposal that are sent in, the proposals are more or less from the global north, and they have the proposal and their speakers. But the global south, we are not speakers. Most of us are not speakers in those workshops. And when you push, you don't have the space to push out there because we weren't part of the proposal of the workshops. And so, apart from the fact that we have just started 3 years, and we have made such a great stride by growing to 110, 12, or 114 now. So is there not an influence? Is there not an outcome? And are those local perspectives not being taken into consideration? Are they not part of the concrete outcomes of the IGF? Legitimacy, outcomes, and visibility. Those are things we consider. So, and some of the NRIs will be very, very happy that they are going to speak. Some members of the NRIs or coordinators, they will be very, very happy that they are going to speak at global level. Some of them record it and they take it as a point to get things done in their local levels. So I don't see why we are trying to compare. And if anything, if people are withdrawing from the global IGF, people are joining the local IGF, the national IGF, and so we are getting more members. So I don't think that is a good argument to say that you are not seeing the influence of the collaborative sessions of the NRIs. And at the network level, we all agree that it's important to us. I think I want to say it to the MAG that the NRIs should be given that opportunity to continue the collaborative session. If MAG has done its own work for about, this is the 14th, at least the 14th IGF, and instead of seeing a lot of stakeholders more coming, we are seeing some stakeholders withdrawing. So I don't see why, and that is the beauty of IGF. IGF is for everybody and is open, so none should be put down because there are others that are going up. Thank you.
Mary, thank you. A lot of good points, and I'm sure the growth we've seen in the NRIs is due to their increasing visibility, and I also think the increasing collaboration between all parts of the ecosystem are strengthening in both ways. It's strengthening the global annual meeting, it's strengthening a lot of those other intersessional events, and I think we need to continue looking at it, but I think you made a number of good points, and I, personally, I've always been very, very supportive of the NRIs and think it's important that we do what we can to support them and give them the visibility. We think it's hard doing an IGF of an annual meeting, and we've got a full-time secretariat support staff, we've got host country support, we've got venue logistics support. All these sorts of activities are actually done at the local level through the NRIs, largely through volunteer networks. So I think when we can support them at this level on the global stage, I actually personally just feel it's really kind of our duty and almost a responsibility to do as much as we can to support them. So Lucien's asked for the floor, and then Christine.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to support what Mary said. NRI is quite important in bringing local topics and bringing up local issues to the global level, but also the other way around, bringing obviously possible implementation of global policies to any of the countries and region. So I'm quite in favor of giving them a voice in the global event at this level. And also, I agree on the fact that it's a tangible outcome to have a growing network on local communities, countries, and region. Thank you.
No, thank you, Lucien. Christine.
Sorry. Oh, that's okay. Can we switch maybe? Okay, sorry, there seems to be a problem with the mic. This is Christina Alida from the government of Egypt, former host for the record. Actually, I was thinking about what Sandra brought to the table, and Henriette actually also put in a good thing that we need to think how can we not only give a space but also get the voices of the Global South into the program, and I think this is a very important point that we should think about for the future, even in a more strategic way. So I'm happy that the MAG is going on with the idea of giving
the NRI's main session this year. I think that's an important thing. But I think we should experiment how can we, through the NRIs, have more speaking slots within the main sessions filled. And so we can gradually integrate this main session into actual sessions in further years, so that we have a process for the future where really the NRIs can bring to the table speakers from their local communities, and in that sense have the visibility that is needed, and at the same time have the voices from the Global South in terms of issues brought to the IGF. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christine. I want to just, so I've been in the WebEx chat room all day, but my computer is overheating and running at a rapid pace, and it kicked me out, and I haven't logged back in. If there's any kind of critical points in there that we should be bringing into the room, if somebody could just alert me. So let's, we had the update from Anya on behalf of the NRIs with respect to their desires, their plans for the IGF. I would like to do the DCs as well, so we have the discussion now, and then I think the next question is whether or not we go through the day zero and the open forum events before we wrap up today, or whether or not we start the morning with that. So we can take that discussion then. There's something nice about getting the overall program discussions and the overall lay of the land out, but I'm also conscious that it's getting a little bit late, and we would again be asking the transcribers and the AV folks to stay on. So I will look to the MAG to kind of give some signals to what they think is the most appropriate. But Jutta, is it you who are going to kick off the discussion on dynamic coalitions?
Of course, I do think I can do that quickly, and first I need to apologize that I brought up the wish of the dynamic coalitions for a main session under the previous topic. I thought that was a time and not right now. So having said that, I could add that to the discussion whether it should be a thematic main session as it was done last year, or a main session of the dynamic coalitions only focusing on the dynamic coalitions works. I do think what we did last year with the dynamic coalitions was a very good exercise, trying to tie the work of the dynamic coalitions to the Sustainable Development Goals, and that led us to a joint dynamic coalition session that was appreciated by many, but not by all of the dynamic coalition members. One reason might have been that we only had 80 minutes, which was a bit of an overload for having all the dynamic coalition that took part and try to present their work and tie it to the SDGs, and also we had the overarching theme of that main session. So that might be different in case this year there is more time for a dynamic coalition session. Personally, I still think that it was a good exercise to try to find some commonalities in the work of the dynamic coalitions and to bring that forward also to the scene. We have discussed with the dynamic coalitions whether it would be better to have the joint session at the beginning, where it could also be used for dynamic coalitions to advertise their individual sessions that will then follow throughout the program of the IGF, or whether it could be the other way around and have the session at the end of the program. And I do think it would be beneficial for the further dialogue of the dynamic coalitions if we could just see where it could be scheduled in the whole program, because then the dynamic coalitions could adapt to whether it's more like presenting the work that has been done or announcing that what should be done during the course of the 4 days. And with regard to the individual sessions of the dynamic coalitions, I would like to turn to Eleonora, who has an overview on what proposals she's got from the 18 now, I think, or do we have 17? Sorry.
Thank you, Jutta. We have 18 DCs, but we received 17 requests to hold sessions, and all 17 are eligible, meaning all the 17 DCs who made the requests met their activity and reporting requirements over the last year. And we actually have the list of those sessions displayed on the screens, but they're very tiny and difficult to read. I actually like seeing DCs listed all at once because it gives a good idea of the real range of or rainbow of issues that they cover. And next to each DC name, there's the title of their session. I mean, I hope it's also somewhat clear from the titles that these aren't just going to be sessions where DCs talk about themselves, but they're going to be sharing their research, their ideas, and generating discussions around the topics that they cover. What's not on that list is the themes that most DCs indicated their sessions would be tied to. I think 10 out of 17 chose the digital inclusion theme. The rest are sort of evenly split among security and data governance. So definitely we will expect DCs to be part of the reporting in process too for the thematic tracks.
Eleanor, thank you. Just one quick, I think what's on the screen is the day 0 events list.
Okay, wrong slide. Sorry.
Any comments, questions on the day 0, or do we need to go back over the day 0 main session request if people aren't recalling it from earlier? Of the DC main session request if people aren't recalling it from earlier. Is everybody set with the DC main session request? Or would people like to hear it again? I just don't want to rush through, and on the other hand, we don't need to beat something to death if we don't need to beat it to death either. What Jutta said when she started her comments was that she had covered the DC's position on a main session request earlier in the afternoon on another intervention. And I just want to make sure that people feel that we're giving appropriate time to the discussion here, everybody recalls the discussion, and that we understand what the current request is. So would people like to hear it again, or are we okay? Okay? I hear heads nodding okay and a few thumbs up. And now on the slide are the DC sessions. We'll wait just a moment and let everybody, they're basically the DCs that we have. We had 2 new ones this year, right? Yes. There's one on the Dynamic Coalition on domain name system issues, and then it was the other one, public access in libraries? No. Right, so the DC on the sustainability of journalism and news media, which we heard about yesterday from one of the co-facilitators. Okay, then I guess we are square on that, as I'm not hearing any further questions or further requests to bring that forward. Do we want to just quickly maybe introduce the day 0 or the open forums, maybe the open forums quickly, so that people know where to find it on the website, know it's there, and we can touch upon it quickly tomorrow morning again once people have a time to think about it?
We can find the Day Zero on the Day Zero events on the IGF website. If we go to the IGF website, if we can, if they know. But you can follow on your computer as well. Under latest news, we have a list of all the proposals from the open forums, Day Zero events, DC sessions, and NRI sessions, and the IGF village. So if you, which one are we going now, Day Zero?
Whichever one you'd like.
Okay, well, with the Day Zero events, I mean, that's more or less done. We are, as I mentioned before, we are able to accommodate all the requests, one from each organization. There are some organizations that ask for 2 sessions, e.g. Knowledge Cafe. We are going to, if there's no objections, from the MAG, we are going to contact them after this MAG meeting and tell them, please, can you please select one of them, or they can merge the 2 sessions together. They will only be given 1 slot. And then in doing that, we are able to fit in all the requests. So basically, I think the only question would be, is there any objection to anybody receiving a Day Zero event? But we are able to accommodate all of them. Okay, and then if we go to the open forums, front page, you just click, this is the list of the open forums. On the program template, at the moment we only have 21 slots for the open forums. And so, barring the time selection, we'll only be able to accommodate 21 slots. And what we're going to do, I think, is give preference to governments, because governments are the one. I mean, this is, of course, first looking at, is it relevant? Does it fit in? Is it in line with the program theme? Because with the open forums, they were asked, if you click on any one of them, they were asked which theme they fall under, and that was also one comment that was made. So we'll take that into consideration, and with all that, then we're going to, in fact, give a regional distribution for governments first, because we are really trying to encourage governments to come to the IGF and have a session and tell us what they're doing in internet governance field. And then, of course, the IGOs and international organizations. There are a few, I'm sorry, since you're here, I might as well just say it. Like the IGF of Indonesia asking for an open forum. Maybe you could consider merging it with an NRI session. And there are a couple, like I think it was open forum number 4, for instance. If you look at it, it's very thin on the ground, and it's not, in our estimation, not really in line with the current program and the current themes, what we're looking at. I mean, they're looking at, okay, yes, it is under cybersecurity, but cybersecurity of data information exchange between cars following the V2V scenario. That's, I think, a little bit too technical for the IGF, and it's more, looks to us more like a something that's better suited for another forum or another academic meeting, so that will get the lowest priority, for instance. I think that's all for the overview.
Just as a quick point, the Day Zero and the open forum events have traditionally been the responsibility of the Secretariat. But if you're coming in off the street and you walk into an IGF meeting, you don't know what the difference is. You look at it and it feels like it's all the IGF program. So the MAG has, the last few years, taken a look at all of those, and the Secretariat has used the MAG as kind of consultation, sort of sanity check body. So, I mean, that's the process the Secretariat ran through this year as well. which is why Chengetai said if there is something that someone in this room objects to or thinks it shouldn't be there, that is feedback you should provide to the Secretariat.
And also this year it's going to be clearer what is, the workshop program, what is the main focus of the IGF, because there are in set rooms. The open forum program and the dynamic coalitions, etc., are in other rooms, so it is more clearer for people this year.
Could you quickly talk about the plan for the lightning or flash sessions, just so we get that, since that was a big topic earlier?
I'll hand that over to Eleonora.
Thank you, Chengetai. So typically we actually manage the lightning sessions after the workshop selection has concluded, because they emerge from non-selected workshop proposals. So the way these reviews have been conducted in the past is priority has been given to workshop proposals that were not selected and were short to begin with, that had some indicators on them that were promising in the evaluation, like they discussed emerging topics or a topic that, even if the proposal originally requested more time, looked like it could be condensed into a 20-minute presentation. And then, of course, we would work with those proposers on reformatting the content for a lightning session, and the resulting sessions depends on this review and also the willingness of those proposers to actually take on that kind of very informal format. Lightning sessions are held not in rooms, but usually in a public space at the venue that gets some foot traffic, so that people walking by stop by and stand or sit and listen to the presentation. So that is something that we'll have to start looking at beginning next week and over the next few weeks.
Thank you, Eleonora. And just quickly on the newcomers, I believe we agreed earlier that we would move the newcomers session probably up a little bit earlier in the morning so that it wasn't competing with any of the topping or introductory sessions. We still need, I think, some work or another ad hoc team to actually pick up. We've had MAG members in the past who were really excited about the newcomers and supporting and took responsibility for drafting a newcomers session. I don't know if we have MAG members who have expressed interest in that this year, or if that's something the Secretariat is driving, but that is an additional open item. I'm guessing from the from the faces around the room here. So let's pick that up tomorrow. Maybe we can think about what we need for newcomer sessions. Maybe we're a little bit more clear on the topping and tailing. I think we'll stop now. Tomorrow, we've gotten through the agenda for today. Tomorrow, the bulk of the day is on main session activities and preparations. We have a session later in the afternoon, which was to kind of cover some of the multi-year work programs and IGF outputs and reporting mechanisms. I think the IGF output and reporting mechanisms, some of that I think we can pick up in the tailing, the ad hoc working group we have going on the reports and communications as a logical next step for that. So we have time for that. I'm hopeful that we actually get to both those topics, the multi-year work programs and the IGF output tomorrow afternoon. I think the priority has to be on the main sessions. And we'll come back in the morning at 10. Eleanor and I will work on a list of the kind of topics and suggestions we've heard here. So that will be in your email box tonight. And if we wanted to tomorrow, we could even potentially do a couple of small breakout groups if we wanted to kind of advance roughly some of the. So we'll do a little bit of work to prep that discussion tonight, but just come tomorrow prepared to work on significantly advancing the main topics, main session planning. Again, tomorrow, same schedule as today, 10 to 1, 3 to 6. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for staying with yet another very full full day. I think we made a lot of progress. Thank you to the transcribers and the audiovisual team and Rudolph.
One organizational point, I would have to ask you to leave the building today before 7 o'clock. That would be really, really welcome for everybody who is concerned with security.
And without any more alarms like last night.
So this is going. Is the door we came in open till 7?
The door you came in is open until 7 sharp.